Ready? You're on.
Ready? Yeah, ready to go. Okay, so welcome everyone.
Turn your mic on.
Welcome everyone, and I guess we will start off with the public comment period, the first public comment period. So if you look at the agenda, just before we start that really quick, we do have a few things that are possible for action, but I don't think there's anything of importance for voting. So that, people have asked that if we can have a comment period before a vote. We're looking into that, and I think anytime we have anything of importance, we will try to work with the group. I thought that was the understanding I had with the city, that was okay with that. If we had an important vote, we could have a comment period before that. Am I missing something, Dennis? You just look like you had a question.
I don't think it's a problem.
Okay, I just want to make sure that, because since we had more action items this time, that they weren't thinking we were following what they'd ask.
I don't think it's a problem.
Well, I don't plan to have one every time. It's just a major vote. If we have a major vote, that's why I'm saying it now, because we don't have anything of really importance that we're voting on today. Even if there is a vote, I'm not sure there is a vote. So, okay, so I'll open up the first comment period to anybody.
Good evening. For the record, Fred Volz. Items 2 and 6 on the agenda tonight, the Integrated Resource Plan says Boulder City helps low-income ratepayers to the tune of about 298 households, or just over 4% of the total residential ratepayer base. But welfareinfo.com states that in 2016, 11.1% of BC households were living below the poverty line. Therefore, it seems that what we're doing now is not helping those least able to afford city utility rates, and recommendations on how to financially assist the rest of those living in poverty are appropriate when it comes time to review the rate consultant's findings, especially if base connections are staying at their high rates or increased. We don't know if water rates are subject to low-income subsidies. It's not in the IRP, and I don't believe it's been covered so far in any of the other informational reports. And regarding the rate structure, the city is giving itself quite a deal at 4 cents a kilowatt hour versus all the other rate classes, which doesn't seem to be encouraging conservation by having that sweetheart deal. Similarly, the hospital pays a $25 a month base rate, and that should be higher, as should the 107 meters that the city itself runs, which are at the same $10 rate service charge as residential. On item 4, unless the utilities director presents more information tonight, we still have over $21 million of existing budgeted capital improvement projects floating in outer space, basically. We don't know if the money's been spent, will be spent, the projects have been canceled altogether, or some other status. It seems imprudent to be throwing more ratepayer money at new projects when the existing ones are not properly managed and the accounting leaves much to be desired. Instead, let's make fiscal year 2021 a catch-up year where all the existing projects are completed before allocating any new monies to a project management system that is clearly broken and unable to account for the already allocated monies so that rows and columns of numbers tie to one another. This problem was reinforced at the last City Council meeting about fiscal year 2021 capital projects last week. Regarding item 7, the water and sewer condition assessment contract has no information on how the summary scores were tallied. In other words, who voted for which contractors and why. We and the public, and you on the committee, shouldn't have to plumb city records to have an intelligent conversation about the recommended and deleted contractors. This information should have been part of the agenda package. Most troubling in the proposed scope of work is the lack of assessing equipment in confined spaces, making inferences on buried assets, and destructive, non-destructive testing of facilities. If a $400,000 consultant won't or can't do these tasks, then who will do them, or is the city just going to wait until this infrastructure fails and then replace items on an emergency basis? How will these 3 excluded areas be addressed should be a question answered. Also, regarding the consultant contract, there is no fudge factor included for contingencies as there was with the utility rate study contract. It would be interesting to know why this is the case for the proposed contract in this instance. And finally, regarding the SNWA Joint Water Conservation Plan, item 8, it is very short on mandates for government agencies and long on requirements for residences. Voluntary plans to convert athletic fields or remove turf don't really address the long-term water needs. Golf courses need to conserve, and we need to stop building new ones with turf. The same applies to swimming pools and the evaporation factor that afflicts them. Perhaps the committee can suggest in its final report that SNWA take a more proactive approach toward conservation with government agencies and recreational facilities, and not expect the conservation just to be done at residences. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. What I'd like to do is just go over the agenda really quick and see if we need to move anything around or not. I think I've got a little better understanding of how things are going to fall out than I might have had. So number one, I don't see there's any. We'll do number one first. So number two, my understanding is...
If I may, that should say September 4th.
Thank you.
And just so everybody knows, we did have a little snafu with our transcription service, so you'll see more minutes at the next meeting, like 3 of them. So I apologize for that, but they'll be coming.
So are we doing minutes on the workshops? So you're talking. So I'm assuming you say 3. We got the September 23rd.
Correct.
Okay. So if I understand correctly, number 2 would be more of you're just either something brief, Dennis, or basically saying that it's part of the package?
I'll just make a few brief comments, but it's really just to let everybody know in the event that they didn't, that it exists. And then I'll just talk a little more about it, but not in depth.
Okay. And George is helping me. George will be leading number 5, which is the tasks, and that's number 2 and number 8 are related to the tasks that this committee has been assessed. And so I think they're going to be coming later down. So same thing with number 8. You were looking at just a few quick comments.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because I think. Probably not until next calendar year, sometime after January, that we'd probably start looking into this into more depth. So, but there again, and we can get to that one to make sure that the rest of the committee agrees with those.
Yeah, and just
assessments.
And we can talk about when we get to it. But the Joint Water Conservation Plan does need to go to council before the end of the year, so it would go in December.
I'm sorry, which one again?
The Water Conservation Plan.
Oh, okay, okay. And then same thing with number 2, I believe if I'm reading it correctly, it's July. It was because it is an annual update.
Yeah.
So maybe in May or June or something, we'd want to by then
bring back an update.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so what's the date on the water conservation, do you know?
It would be, there's only one city council meeting in December, so whatever that date is, just because this is it's a NRS requirement. So I was going to talk about this when we get to it, but
okay.
So we could, if we needed to, we could talk about it at our next meeting again in December before the council meeting.
Probably that's what we need to do then. Okay. Okay.
December 10th.
Thank you. So then 3, looks like most likely 3 and 5. I'm not sure how much 7 will take up, and then 9 will be our more lengthy items, probably, depending on how 4 falls out, how much 4 gets interlinked with 3. So I guess we can go ahead and go. Like I said, I just wanted to bring up the fact about 2 and 8 being part of the tasks, and making sure I understood that those, especially since that is a very long, the water documents is a very big document, large. So is there any comments, anything different from the committee? Anything else that comments on the agenda? Okay. I'm sorry.
Make my Jorge comment? Or
Oh,
I
thank
don't
you.
have-
No, that's fine. Yeah, that was a good point. So once you bring it up, and we'll do that before everything else.
Yes, okay, yes. I didn't want to be sentimental or anything, but Councilman Jorge passed away, and I thought he was a good guy, and I don't think we'd be sitting here without his efforts. He was very determined to create this committee, and he was also tolerant, I think, I disagreed with him on a lot of stuff, but he was always tolerant and polite. He always made himself available, had his coffee with the councilman. I think he was a good guy, and I appreciate all the work he did. I just want to get that off my chest, so thank you.
Thanks, George. Appreciate that. Okay, so does anybody have any? I have some comments on the minutes. Does anybody have any comments for the minutes of the September 4th? Okay, so I gave a copy of my comments to Josh, and just so I think they're relatively easy to follow. So most of these are just for clarity, and on page 1 and 2, so the bottom part is on the disclosure information. It's the last. Chairman Carr indicated that he wanted to disclose information to the committee and read a statement into the record. And I think to help clarify that, I'd prefer to add in the process of trying to keep things inclusive and fair, he sent an email requesting input on the proposed agenda for this meeting to the full committee. So that makes things helpful and a little easier to understand in the future. Let's see. Then after that, they've got one sentence. The first he, we don't have anything. The second he said, it had been brought to his attention, this could be a violation, so a violation instead of in violation of the open meetings law, and I think to be consistent with the meetings, it would be law instead of act with the rest of it, since all the committee members were included in the email. Let's see, then the next, he said he immediately stopped the communication and no further emails will be sent from him to the full committee. And I think I did go back and review it, and it might have come out, I'm not positive if I said or other committee, but it doesn't make sense to that aspect. It's the full committee that we don't want to do. So if we can put to the full committee and then scratch or any other committee, and then just going forward. Okay, thanks. Page 2, he asked if the committee was agreeable to holding meetings on the first Wednesday instead of first meeting. And then Chairman Carr requested a Word document of the minutes so committee members could provide red line and strikeouts. And then to help clarify that, because since it was indicated that that would not happen, I want to make sure that put it into the minutes that what I understood was said was that it was stated that the city, so I'd prefer to add this, it was stated that the city would revise the minutes and include them in the next meeting's package, and at the time we could state our revisions in the open meeting. Okay, on page 3, Chairman Carr noted the slides for 2019 do not match the financial statements from the August 13th City Council meeting, just so that we know what meeting I was referencing. And then on page 4, it starts, Utilities Director Porter stated the information was a snapshot. Time, and he wanted to provide the committee information about, take out the before the word how. On page 5, the committee discussed the difference in using portable water compared to raw water, so just add ing instead of es. Utility Director Porter indicated that they can move forward with holding meetings on the first Wednesday of each month. So delete the A and add an S. Page 6, Chairman Carr noted that they could give an update to the committee, to the City Council. So it'd be comma to this, to comma, the City Council, to comma, let them know what is being worked on and what has been achieved. Or again, just so it's clear who we'd be reporting to. And then the very last one, Chairman Carr asked if the meeting on the 23rd will have video for people to go back and review. So add the word go. Okay, so if nobody else has any other comments, then we'll go to number 2 then. The item number 2 on the agenda. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you very much. So, move to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay. So the meeting minutes for September 9th have been approved by the committee. And so there again, as we stated before, once these changes have been made, then I'll be willing to sign it. Okay, now I'm sorry. Item number 2.
Item number 2 is, as we discussed earlier, is the electric integrated resource plan. That's a 5-year plan that's required by WAPA. It was adopted by City Council in 2018. This committee would be looking at at annual updates. It basically includes demand information, customer information, the low-income information. It's a good document for if you need quick information. I think it's something this committee could look at as we move forward. And I agree with you, Chairman Carr. I think sometime in late spring, bring back an amended that would have the previous year update. I would assume we're going to hear from WAPA because they ask. I don't think they necessarily ask for annual updates. They just want the information. But I haven't heard from them, so I don't know the exact details of how they get their updates. But I will let you guys know when I know. So.
Yeah, because theoretically there should have been a request in July if it's annual. So
right.
You didn't hear anything.
No.
This time it could be.
No. So we'll reach out and find out.
Yeah, it could be since I believe Rory probably would have been their contact. Maybe somebody didn't,
At that time, yes.
didn't get the new update or something and
Right.
didn't get it sent.
Or it could have been just there was nobody there in the interim, so it could have got just lost.
Yeah, and what I remember too, though, I'm not sure that it's one thing that Western harps on. That I'm sure they harp on the 5-year and not necessarily the annual.
Probably.
But it definitely would be it'd be a good exercise for us, for the committee to go through.
It's a good exercise for staff as well. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So stay tuned for more information in the future on that. Presentation of the, oops, I'm sorry.
So I guess to address the comments that we got from the beginning, so have the 11% below poverty, I guess. So I guess make sure maybe we acknowledge that in the comment period and that we just take that forward to the rate study, I guess.
Yeah, they'll be taking a look at that. I mean, I don't know that I'd have to go back and review the scope of work. I don't know that we included a lot of effort as it relates to affordability, but they'll certainly look at the program, look at the data. If there's something they see there that he thinks we need to think about or take a look about, we can certainly do that.
Well, I think there is confusion. I'm confused on what programs are out there.
Yeah.
And if I understood, some programs are there, some programs are being deleted, or I'm not sure if I'm understanding correctly everything that's available. So I guess make sure that the rate study understands, so we know what is available, and if we do have if there is a reasonable rate hike, how do we ease it in
How
for
do
other
we do it?
people?
And they will certainly take a look at that. There's lots of different methods that are there for, depending on what those low income standard or requirements are. Typically, a lot of utilities follow whatever the state uses for those poverty levels. And an example of a rate structure would be that you could have a reduction in the service charge for folks that meet that requirement, as an example. So they'll come with some alternatives.
Is there any comments from the committee from the IRP? Okay, so then go down to actually number 3, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you.
So number 3 is really just kind of a high level. I think Vice Chairman Reed made a very good point at the last meeting about, I don't even necessarily know where all these facilities are located or exactly what they are. So we just put together a quick map I'll bring up and kind of go through real quick. And I know you got a special tour, so, and some of you, obviously, Ned, you folks up there can probably answer questions better than I can, so.
One question I had going into this is, as I look through some of the ones, some of them are kind of expensive, and I'm just wondering what the urgency is, how soon we really have to move on some of those, whether we can push some of them out, or whether the horse is already out of the barn, or whether we can.
It's a combination.
Yeah.
And, as an example, and I'll show it to you when I get up there. but,
Okay.
Yeah, we can
Sure,
talk about
fine.
that.
Test 1. And Dennis is on.
I think we have to let the public know that this is confidential and not able to be released by the state of Nevada and other laws, rules, and regulations. So that's why it's presented to the committee and not the general public for publication.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. It's actually an NRS requirement that we don't release the information. We'll just be presenting it to the committee, and you won't get any handouts. So, and no photographs. So, that being said, you guys were sworn in just like I was, so you get special privileges. So real quick, we'll just kind of go through the system at kind of a high level. One of the big items that's been out there and discussed quite a bit was the BC substation. So that is where we have the 69 kV substation coming off of the WAPA 230 kV circuits. That transformer, I believe, that's out there now is at least 55 years old, maybe a little older. It's at the end of its life. It can't, if it had to provide the full demand for Boulder City all by itself, it couldn't do it, nor could this conductor handle it. That's there today. So that's part of what drove this. If you want some history going back, and Ned knows a little bit of this, obviously, there used to be a connection at NV Energy. That could be a backup source. NV Energy was going to be kind enough to charge us $800,000 a year to have that connection there, plus pay for whatever power we'd use. So that's really what drove the decision to do the BC tap and actually the loop as well. So those are two high priority projects. The 69 kV loop right here is in construction.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt real quick? So on the BC tap, there is there's a contract or a let, whichever way we should say it best. And I can't remember if I understood correctly. Is that the last bit?
So what's happening now is the transformer's been set. I'm going to try to remember. It's either EES or ESS is out there. They'll be starting, well, they have started. They won't really be getting going until December with all the overhead work to energize the transformer. That's necessary to be done. They should be done in March. I'm saying that loosely because WAPA's already pushed us out a couple of weeks, and so they were planning on being out there this week. They probably won't be out there till December 9th. So That's just kind of a WAPA thing. So that's that.
Now, I'm sorry, but is that the last bit, or is
That would be the last bit.
So what we need for additional is going to be part of the Buchanan project? The Buchanan BC
So
tap?
that would just finish this
Correct.
at the site. What we put out for proposals, the design build proposals, so let's finish the loop.
Okay,
first.
gotcha.
The loop basically provides the redundancy and the reliability for the entire city, because we also get the demand, provide for demand off of the WAPA Mead substation. This is where mostly everything comes from. So that provided the reliability and redundancy of having the BC tap, everything off of Mead, this to loop the city. And then we'll talk about this project in a second, or next. So that all makes sense? Okay, so the design build proposals we just, and this, by the way, I believe is around 4 million. The design build proposals that we just opened were for the pole replacement and the conductor replacement for this purple all the way to Buchanan. Next 18 months.
Now that's, and to
And
do,
this, and this one, to give you an idea, this is down Adams. It's down Adams, so if you drive down, and it's actually, we did some analysis with those poles and with the aerial drones and some penetration testing. We didn't tell the consultant that we were going to be replacing that because we didn't want them to know. And they validated that most of those poles are way past their useful life. They're hollow. Both from a visual inspection and a penetration testing.
A little history on those. Little history on those poles is when those poles were installed back in, I think, 1960 or 61. That wasn't a road. That was desert.
It was desert.
And so they were basically placed in whatever the valleys were, the hills where they placed whatever to follow the terrain. And then when they built Adams Boulevard, they leveled it out. And so there were a number of poles that were actually buried above what they call the treat.
Right.
And so those that you can see that were wrapped with fiberglass and reinforced, those were the poles that were buried deeper than they should have been, and so they rotted off when they got above the treat.
I gotcha.
And so they were weakened. So that's the history on those things.
Okay, well, I was minus 3 years old at that time, so. So those are really the larger projects. Now, as it relates to the substations, substations 1 and 2 are in the worst shape, worst condition. They're not safe. The game plan is that they eventually go away. We would rebuild substations, blind all of a sudden, 3 in FY22 and 4 in FY23 would be the plan for those rebuilds.
Another question, if I may. I know that money has been raised over the last few years with the rate increases and things like that, and I guess put in the bank, so to speak. Is there a substantial amount of that already funded, or are we still looking to fund a little bit?
So we know there's revenue available for this, obviously for this, because it's in process. We're going to kind of let the rate study analyze that. So if there's any movement that needs to occur, we can look at that. My suspicion is, but I'm going to wait till we get the data, is that we would probably prefer to move ahead with the substation work. If you're going to ask me, just from what I know so far, if I was going to potentially move anything out, even though I've driven this, it's not in good shape either. And it serves this is going up to the top of the mountain. It serves the airport, whatever they call that. It also has a snack area-wide communication tower is up there. So there's some big customers up there. one question I have in my mind, if that's so important to FAA, is there grant funding that might be available to assist with that? So I think that's something we can think about.
Right now, you got, if I'm reading it right, that you said that's for 23rd and 20, fiscal year
23 and 24, but
24.
it's a lot of money. I think it's 2.4 million. I can't remember. I'd have to go back and look. But that being said, we can easily do a quick evaluation on the pole condition in the next couple of months and put a better date to that. Because that one, it's just like anything else, right? It's all about risk. And when you drive it visually, a lot of those poles look a lot like these.
Larry, Dennis, if you were to assign a priority, would you do the mountaintop job versus the San Felipe job first? Which one would you do first? San Felipe's coming in for a feeder replacement for the whole line and then go back into Georgia,
Sure.
so
It's your
there's
green-
4 taps.
It's your green right there. Dennis.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Adam's down to it.
I'm going to have to ask. Marvis, was that the one that's direct buried? San Felipe? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is all single lot, double direct buried, a crude conduit. So
It was originally direct buried, then it was replaced sometime after that.
some portions of it. Okay.
So that's what I'm trying to do, in other words, assign priority, so we're talking
Right.
about that, taking a higher priority than the mountaintop.
Yeah. Yeah, this could, and again, I think if we take a hard look at this one has some potential for moving out or some potential for some different funding sources. Because my understanding is, and I could be wrong because I haven't dug into it, is that just doesn't serve the McCarran Airport area. It's a much larger area.
We just
Than
move the
that.
meter down to the bottom of the hill and we'll have them paying for everything.
On that, just so we're clear, the San Felipe tie is critical for taking out because it'll be
That's a good point. Forgot about that.
carrying it over to moving into sub 5 so we can support that load that when we move sub 3.
How are we gonna get to sub 5? How are we gonna get to sub 5?
We already have the 53 to Georgia and Sandra, and going down Mendola to San Felipe, that's the route right now. Right now, it's already there, but it's a one-out route. It's a one-out feed,
So what are we gonna increase it to?
500.
Okay, thank you.
So, and embedded in this is still some of the work to do the 4 to 12 kV transition. That's in the current budget.
Dennis, correct me if I'm wrong. It's actually 4160 to 7.2 kV, because we're not bringing 2 hots into the transformers, are we?
4160, 12470.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you.
That's why I brought Marvis. So that's kind of a high level, just so everybody knows where the projects are, where they're located. That these are the priorities that are shown in the current capital plan. This is some of the stuff that in the upcoming months we can look at and have a better feel with the rate study, because what they're going to be able to do real time is once they we'll just have them input the capital plan as it looks like this. As we get new information, we can modify that. We are going to be taking a hard look at the cost estimates for all of these projects in the next few months. And then, of course, we're going to be looking at implementing a pole replacement program moving forward as well. So you'll be seeing that information between now and the spring.
I had a chance to drive around a little bit today and look at the 4 kV conversion, and it looks like it's pretty well along. A lot of the cross arms have been replaced, the insulators have been replaced. It looks like there's just a few areas in town that still need to be done. So do we have a time frame on when that portion of the job is going to be done, like next 6 months or less, or do we know? Or
It's about 18 months.
18 months.
Only part that's really been captured is the old downtown between Wyoming and New Mexico.
Okay. That's kind of what I know south of there it looks like, and even north of there.
Yeah,
But look, they do have Lakeview as
Yeah.
well that's been done, so.
And we'll be letting a new contract shortly to do a lot of that work. Almost.
So Dennis, so I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but on, let's see, item number 6, we'll be talking about the rate study a little bit. And I believe we were looking at the rate study to have a workshop related to that. Is that still, reason I was bringing it up is because I'm wondering if we can do a workshop, because we need more time to really, so I think also a lead into number 4, we've got, as I understand from your worksheet that you finished or gave additional information in the last meeting on the capital programs, we have about 26 ongoing projects. And that's just through 2020, of course, because then we're looking at doing 21. So I think trying to get a better understanding of what projects, what they're doing, what has to be done. You've got some down that would be completed. But I'm trying to think if we could combine sort of like a workshop with the rate study or something to get a better understanding.
Yeah, we can do that. So that I'll have to circle back with the consultant, what they would be coming forth with in, because we're going to talk about December, because I know everybody's dying to have more meetings, because they might have 2 in December. I was having a workshop in December, and we would start to see that information. I was hoping to be able to do that on our first meeting, but unfortunately they got corporate stuff going on, and that also wouldn't give staff opportunity to review what they were going to be presenting to you, which we like to make sure we have that before you guys see it, so we can.
Well, does the rest of the committee seem to agree with the idea with sort of a workshop for these capital programs?
I think so. I had a question in regards to that. They're going to do that rate study based upon some kind of a time schedule as far as when all these projects are going to be completed. And so have we got a pretty good handle on the time frame for all of those so that the money can be characterized so we can basically, I think the whole idea is to fund these pretty much as we go and not have to put them out there for a time type of payment.
Correct, but we're not ruling that out as an option. Now that has to go out for vote.
Yeah.
So that's why, and I don't anticipate that need either, just initially. I'm not seeing a need to go out and incur any debt.
That's what I hope. That would be my preference too. But so the rate consultants, the study people who are doing this, they understand that there's kind of a state of flux there on how that's going to work.
They do. And then in fact, the water and sewer condition assessment work we won't be seeing until, next year. So I'll have to build that into the model as well.
Good.
But I think we'll get a good sense with the plan that exists. And that'll give us a good idea. Do you have to push stuff out? How does it impact the rates? If you push it out, if you bring it forward, whatever that variability is, we can tinker with that rate model. They'll put it up on the screen and they can actually move projects around as we're watching what happens to the revenue requirements and potential rate impacts. I don't know that they'll be that far along in December. But we will be able to start seeing the financial plan and some of that information.
Well, I don't know if it also helps, Ned, at the last, I think it's September, last council meeting, that the financials showed that there were $25 million available cash in the utility funds, and a lot of that's electrical.
Well, that's what I thought. And so I'm hoping that we have raised almost enough money to do all of this.
Yeah,
which would be great.
And you probably remember better than I do, but just based on everything I read, a lot of these they were originally scheduled to be sooner, but that the cash wasn't there because they didn't do the rate increases until 2016, 2015.
17, something like that.
Yeah. So those projects kind of got pushed out.
Yeah, so I think that's good.
Yeah, the other thing too, I think that's why I said I'm not, if it could be done if we don't have a lot of things on the next meeting, we could start it or even maybe do it there. But there's still, I have a lot of confusion because you've got the projects trying to figure out what's going on, but you also have the funding because there's a certain amount of the capital improvement fund that was scheduled for the old existing ongoing projects that, from what I can see in the financials, was not used.
Yeah.
And so that would help reduce, because that's not even part of the 25 million, I don't believe. It's
Yeah.
not. And so that would help our cost also.
Yeah.
Another question going forward, and this is just for my general understanding. Once a lot of these projects are paid for, is it the possibility we can look at maybe reducing rates to go back to where they, because our long term looks like our wholesale costs are not going to go up that much.
Certainly not for the next 5 years.
Right. And I think even beyond
So
that.
I'm not going to try to guess the answer to that, but maybe they're stable. Maybe they don't have to be increased. I think it kind of depends on what a pole replacement program is going to look like on the electrical side, and you know, in this case, we're just talking about electrical. What I really don't have a good feel for is the water and sewer side. We have a pretty good feel here. All the stuff underground, and you know, it's harder to assess. And
So just to make sure I'm following the numbers, earlier when we were doing the public comment, there was a note about 21 million in capital projects with some level of uncertainty or something of that nature. Plus, we're talking about another 25 million on top of that.
and I don't have the actual numbers in front of me, but to put it in perspective, there's 4 million encumbered here that I don't believe was shown in that spreadsheet. So that'll be, this project should be done by springtime. So that money will be spent. This project will be it's around 8 million in the next 18 months. So that'll be spent. So that's 8.4. That's another 12 on top of that. So we're still working a little bit on that spreadsheet. It's close. We just want to flesh it through with finance. And I think the thing to do with that workshop, by the way, while I'm thinking about it, is have finance in the room with us. So when you guys have real specific questions about reports and all that stuff, they can answer them better than I can.
So just to follow up on that, then that means that if we're starting with 21 million, again, using that number from the public comment, and then you just spoke about 12 million, and then there's still 9 million plus the 25?
When I said the 25 is what is available in cash. So that's totally separate issues. Yes, and that's available cash. There's 16 million that's not available as part of reserves, and some other, that'd be interesting to understand how that falls out.
And that's why when we start looking at that data going forward, we'll know how much additional revenue we're generating through the next 5 years with the current rate structure as it is.
Yeah, and that's why, so when we get to number 4, really, we won't be able to, I don't believe this committee can make a recommendation because there's really not enough information for us to make a valid recommendation. But right now, what you have, if I can understand, this is, and I'm working more at electrical, so the 21 is, I'm not sure if it's electrical and all of them or not, if it's 21 or 27 million, that's electrical and the water and wastewater. Sure. There's a combination of that.
I think it's just electrical, but we can.
Well, okay, 21's probably it. Right now, what I understand is the ongoing projects, there's $14 million that was budgeted according to the spreadsheet. I can find, that's one thing that's a little confusing. I can't find one document that matches another.
And you probably won't, because we do move monies around. A good example is the BC Parkway. So it's probably 3 different documents to piece it all together.
And that would be nice if we can get that eventually. It would be nice to understand, because it'd be nice to see, because what you've got is you've got in May and June you've got an approved amount of budgeted numbers, and then that goes to the state. So when you have something that's after that, it's very confusing. So if we can find out how it was budgeted, would be easier. But what I can find is that you've got, like I said, $14 million in ongoing projects right now, and that's also what the financials show. But it would be nice that we match what the financial is saying is 14 million and what the ongoing is. That's where there's a lot of information that's hard to go with. So if we've got 14 million now, there's an additional 7.8 million in 21 for electrical only. 7.8 going on, and I can talk about that in 4, because that's some of that is being covered by the capital improvement fund.
Yes,
and so that helps, but it's just confusing to understand that.
Okay.
And then so now we need to understand what's going on in 2022 and 2002, 3, and 4 to understand, okay, are we gonna still be at 7, 8, and 9 level in those timeframes? Because that is gonna be pretty ouchy for for the rate aspect. I think you can keep out about a $5 million pretty easy. When you go into an 8 million plus, it makes it hard to maintain a reasonable rate schedule.
Yeah.
So if that's helping, but it's the numbers, that's why we need a workshop, because it is very confusing
And I
trying
think
to keep track.
we could make that combined with our finance folks as well as the rate consultant. That should help with that.
Okay, yeah, and it might be something that would be helpful for the rate group to understand too then, because you've got some of the information out there, but it's still, I believe you've got some capital information out there, but it's not complete yet.
Yep. So
I had one comment. So we've been at this for many years, and it might be worth looking in the past how accurate these numbers have been. When you submit a capital plan and you say we're going to spend this much next year, how much did we actually spend?
yeah, well, I don't have that in front of me. I can tell you this: one of the concerns I have are those cost estimates going forward.
So we
we're
have
gonna look hard at those.
I'm big on error bars, as you know I'm obsessed with them. So otherwise, these numbers, we're chasing ghosts otherwise, in some sense, if we don't have a sense of how accurate these numbers are.
Yeah, but there's another caveat or a facet to this problem. Number one, a lot of this stuff can be purchased in advance. Okay, so you're taking and buying at a lull, or you're buying a surplus, or you're buying whatever. Aluminum wire does not rot on a spool in the desert. The poles don't rot, steel poles don't rot in the desert. So in order to take and utilize our money more efficiently, because we're doing a design build, we can spec out the poles, we can purchase the poles, we can store the poles, and we can bring a contractor in and say, okay, T&M, what is it going to cost? And that'll save 20 to 30% of the budget cost of these projects. Right. Okay, and that's the way I used to have to do it, and it worked out really good. There's a lot of people out there, believe it or not, you don't have to buy a new pole from Valmont. You can actually get a pole from a secondary market that's surplus and save 30 to 40%. Okay, and that's called smart purchasing. We have a purchasing agent now on staff. He can be directed to go out and shop for this material that we're going to be needing. And that way it's here on site. Because the problem is that nobody's talking about is you cannot test the Boulder City tap transformer without being able to load the transformer up with the full load of the town. Without that transformer cable, that feeder cable and supply from Boulder City tap to substation 3, we cannot accomplish that. We cannot accomplish that task. The lines will sag down to the ground when we load that thing up with 60 meg.
Yeah. So, and that's what I would anticipate is this piece will be done first. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yeah, but, so I think I think it's going to be, the capital is going to be another one that probably on every agenda item. There's just a lot of information. So, because you're going to be, so the city will be doing the electrical assessment. Dennis, do you know when that might start?
So we're basically, as an example, we're looking at the main areas where, because we're really focusing on pole replacement and some transformer replacement, and it's putting that into a program. So we're working with, and it doesn't take them long. They were able to do that stretch along Adams, thank you, in 3 days. Because when you're not climbing every pole and you're using, and the drone, the capability is so much better than I've seen in the past as far as the visual and the thermal imagery. And then the penetration testing on the poles is, the technology is better than it used to be. So I think we can get that work done again by spring as well. So.
Now, is it feasible, and the rest of the committee agrees with me, I think, can we at the workshop, go over each ongoing item. Like I said, I'm seeing that there's 26. The part of it is the mapping, is the, is it the, what was it, the,
Well, the mapping's being done in-house now. So what we did, the old plan before I was here was, we were having some outside assistance with that. What that was doing was we weren't getting the 4 to 12 kV conversion work done, so we switched the priority to the 4 to 12 kV, and we're doing the mapping in-house.
but it's still part of the, it's just understanding what the process is. And
Oh, yeah. As far as the projects themselves?
yeah, because I think you've
yeah,
got one set up for 200,000. I think another one set up for 600,000 is what, in 1 year was budgeted for two. And
I know
another
there's
year-
200,000 for sure.
And there's one, that's partly, so if we just went down, so if when you're able to finish that project and you
Can
can,
give updates on each project?
yeah, that would be very helpful.
Okay. I don't know if we'd want to do that at every meeting, because that would take a while.
No, but I'm saying at a workshop, because it doesn't have to be
Oh,
done,
sure,
but
sure,
right
sure.
now,
Yep,
no, we
I
don't,
gotcha.
it's hard to understand what what the importance are of the 26 projects,
Got it.
et cetera. And then it'd be easier for us to say, okay, we need to find out what is our deadline to advise the council on going forward. You want, my understanding is the city is asking for the council to adopt the capital projects in this, the 11th.
For FY21.
Correct, but we don't have enough information to make that, but since it's not being fully adopted until May, if we did it in March or something like that, then that's where a workshop would be helpful, so we understand the whole aspect. You've got the cost, you've got the programs, you've got what can and can't be delayed, and we would be able to make a better recommendation. Am I missing anything?
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So now, were you planning to go over doing presentation,
I
Dennis?
was
or-
not, since you got to see it at least once, and some of it saw at the city workshop, and so I didn't think we needed to go over it again unless I don't have the PowerPoint up, so it was really more of a discussion, follow-up discussion.
Okay, because I did have questions, and so I didn't know. And maybe some of the questions can be, if I ask them, we can push them towards the workshop or something to
that's
be. Do you want me to go through the slides, the questions I have, and what you gave us? How would we do? You don't have it to pull up.
It's kind of up to you if you want. You just, I guess they could just send them to me.
Well, some of the stuff, let me just, make sure the committee, and depends if there's any discussion. Does the committee mind if I go over some general comments?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because I think part of it is, there was a couple things. One of the ones, when you're dealing with slide 3, you've got the electrical projects, and you're showing that there's 7.8 being asked for. And that's where it's confusing, and I think it was even brought up at the workshop, is that some of these, now when we're talking about CIP number 2 and number 3, is that related to the lease and the land?
That would be, and I don't have it in front of me what they exactly are, but yes, those are track 349, track 350, those revenues coming in from those sales.
Okay. So the nice thing is that we have a good portion of the 2021 that is being shown as funded by by one or two of the projects.
That's correct.
Your 4K is supposed to be the 1.2 would be fully funded by that. The San Felipe is fully funded by that. At least the section for 2001, the 500,000. And the circuit 45, 61, 62 is 200,000. And that's one, I guess, if we're looking at it, so how would, in the future, would be something that we could look at the importance of that, because that's another one that only has one.
That's okay. I got it right here as well.
It only has one line explaining what it's about on page 7.
Yeah, when we go through those projects, we can give we do that because this is all published, so it has less information.
Okay. Because if you were down to, right now you're down to 5.9 that actually has to be funded by the rate process or the utility fund. And because of what's being, so it's out of the 7.8, if I'm calculating right, it's 5.9. If you put that one off, it could be 5 million. And the reason Yeah, because you have 200 that's funded by SIP is the reason it wouldn't be 4.9. So those are the type of things that would be helpful to understand, and that's what I'm saying, trying to understand what's funded and what would go with part of the rate and what's not.
Yep. And the consultant has all the information regarding the anticipated revenue from the land sales as well. So when he's doing his model, those will all be included in there, and then they can be managed to where we can see what happens in real time.
So
If you modify or change a project time frame.
right. So that would, but we're looking at probably sometime in, I would assume January at the earliest that they'd have anything like that ready, most likely February or March.
Yeah, probably.
So that's what we need to find out, when our recommendation has to be in before we say that, because right now, whatever they approve, if they approve all the revenues for the 2021, and we find out, okay, we don't need all that, I'm assuming we can reduce it.
Yeah, and remember that I would anticipate we'll be far enough along and have a good enough an idea to make a final recommendation on FY21. It's probably those projects beyond that.
That's
At that time, right?
Right.
So-
Well, hopefully we can get a better idea, because like I said, part of it is how much, that's the confusing part, since we've had, I haven't been able to track 18 exactly to what was actually budgeted in 18 as a capital project to what was after it started, what was brought forward. But I believe it was around the 12 million range, because there were so many projects that weren't completed before that time. And now we're looking at 14 million. So that's why I guess, so understanding a lot of the funding would help drastically, I believe.
Yep.
Now,
I mean, but the end goal is to be as accurate with those projects timing-wise, so that we're comfortable that whatever needs to happen with those rates, we're all comfortable with when we're said and done, by the time the rate study's done, obviously.
right, and I guess that's why we need a workshop or something, because there's still not enough information.
I anticipate a number of workshops
Okay.
going into the future. Probably 3 more through May, at least.
Okay, yeah, it's just but we're looking at something that I would assume would be an hour or better for projects. So it would be a whole lot more information that's on the presentation here.
Okay.
Okay. So it looks like the water, we're pretty lucky on this one too, that most of it is, there is no slide so on slide 8, water projected, I didn't find a slide for water main replacement program. So I don't know if that had any funds available to that or not.
I'm looking at it right now. Pardon?
On the screen there.
Oh, no. I got it right here. Hold on. What are we in? So, we do have, for FY21, 500,000 for water main replacement. And that is all coming as well from, land sale.
Okay, so then in that case, water, you only have 400,000, I believe, if I've added it correctly. You only have 400,000 that would come from the utility fund.
For FY21,
yeah.
I believe that's correct, yes.
Okay, and so I guess we'll discuss it a little bit more if there's any update at number 6 about the rate study. Otherwise, we'll just, I guess, ask them. I didn't know, because are they going to have any, or they're not that far along at our next meeting that we would be discussing any of the, that they would have information on the funds going forward with this?
No, I think what you're going to see most likely at the next meeting is some of the data that's being used to, because you have to make some assumptions. Obviously, it's not very hard to make an assumption on growth, but inflation, all those things that are kind of tied to the financial plan. So we can get that kind of through the committee and make sure everybody thinks it makes sense and the numbers they're using make sense, and the demand projections, the growth projections, the water demand projections, all those things that go into the financial plan and eventually into the rate model.
Okay.
So it's kind of upfront information, you can get past that, and then you can start actually doing the modeling.
Right, right. No, I was just, so, and we'll talk a little more then, just making sure how much detail I'm asking for now. Yeah, then it looks like also in wastewater, we're looking at, we're only asking for 35,000 out of the 245,000 out of the utility funds. So overall, I think it's the same thing with landfill. I think landfill is being covered completely by the fund. So that, it helps to, I think, the more we understand that, the better off then we can follow
Yep.
the rate study and see how things are.
Yeah.
So that's why understanding the whole projects, the funding and everything, so sorry to repeat myself.
No, and then just real quick with regards to the landfill, that there's some work we think we can do there to maybe move that out as well, potentially.
So I guess that's all I had for the capital program. Did anybody else have any?
I just had one question. Have you added up those numbers? Because it seems like you've subtracted what's available from how much is needed. And do you know what the total is for the utility?
Well, I think Dennis has it on top, but I think if you brown it to 6 million for the utility, and it was what did we say, 400,000 for the water. So then you'd have 6.4 and 35 for the waste. So you have 6,435,000, I believe. Just a quick off top of my head.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
By just rounding up to 5.9. So actually it'd be 6,335.
Just from the utility, without
from
the
the
sales.
utility, yes.
Yep, that sounds about right.
So I have a quick question regarding slide 8. It says rebuild pressure reducing valve stations, 100,000 for 2021. And then if you go down to slide 10, at the bottom right, it's showing the 100,000 in 2022. Is that supposed to be reflected that way, or am I just not following it correctly?
No, that's correct. There's another 100,000 in 23.
Well,
An additional
So-
100,000.
No, 2021. There is no money in 2021, but it shows in your one slide overall fund. Sorry, go ahead.
No, please. Yeah.
So in your slide that shows the funding for the projects, the blue and white slide.
Yeah. I can tell you in my latest that I'm
Yes,
staring
and
at.
it's that slide. That's what he's looking at. So in the overall slide, you show 100,000 for the water pressure.
Yeah, rebuild pressure.
Yeah, but when you go to the slide itself, it shows it's in 22, not 21. That's what he's asking.
I gotcha. That should be 21.
Okay.
So is it 21 and 22 then?
It's 21 and 23.
And
It would be 200,000. Now, I wouldn't get too wrapped up in that one because those gentlemen are going to be assessing all of those PRV stations and coming up with a plan on how those are going to be
Yeah, just wanted to note.
rehabilitated.
Yeah, just wanted to note that right now it's saying 2022 and 2024 instead of 2021 and 2023. So just
Yep.
minor in the grand scheme of things.
And I would anticipate that to change.
Okay.
Thank you. So are there any other comments on number 4? Okay, thanks Dennis, thanks everybody. So I guess we'll go to item number 5 then, and what? Okay, so well, there's possible action. So I think the idea under 4 was that if we had any recommendations, we would vote on that. Is that what it was, Dennis? Is that what the possible action was there? But thank you though.
That's correct.
I think, Frank, to make sure, I don't believe, but I want to make sure that I'm not saying it for myself, I want to make sure that we're stating for the committee. I don't believe we have enough information to make a recommendation.
No, not at this point.
So at that point, I don't believe there's anything to vote on or action because we don't have enough information to go forward with.
Yep.
So I guess if anything has to be voted on the 11th, this committee unfortunately doesn't have any help to provide.
Correct.
Okay. Oh. Okay, so George, then if you would help us lead us in number 5, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, yes. I was So obviously I'm new to all this, but I'm sometimes a bit goal-driven, and I felt like we were going over a lot of PowerPoints and everything and getting a sort of flood of information, but I didn't sense that we had a goal of, in terms of what it says in the resolution, which is we're supposed to advise, council, utilities director, and city manager. I'm not going to read the whole thing out. And but annually review the 5-year utility capital improvement plan. That's something that's not really. So the question is, what do we mean by review? Is this what we're doing a review, or should we write a report? I would think I'd be happier if we wrote a report and that's an independent report and says here's what we found, and that goes directly to the council. But I don't know if the members agree, or we can at least discuss it.
I'll take a stab and anybody else, but I think what we're looking, if the only way we would be able to do a report is if we had more information. If we can't give a recommendation for the 11th vote, then I don't see how we can do a report until we get more information. So the more information we get, then we can start writing some reports once we get some information. But I don't see how we can give any information to do it. So to answer one of your questions, I believe that's what we're doing. We are reviewing. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the information to review it. The city's working on the information themselves. We need more information. We need them to finish their information before we could do any major reporting. So I don't see how we could do any report. I don't think there's anything by the end of the year that we can have any good information to report on.
I wasn't saying by the end. I was saying, when do we envisage do it? We're supposed to do it annually. Annually means once a year, but when does the year start? Maybe when we were appointed, so we need to do it by next May. I'm open. I'm not saying we have to do it next week,
No, okay.
But it seems like we should do it. Or are we even agreed whether we should do it? Do people feel no, we don't need to report directly to the council?
Ned, I think sorry.
Yeah, I think going forward, we'll have time to get into the middle of this thing and start reviewing these things. We're just playing catch up at this point. I mean, we're kind of behind the ball here, but I think given time, when we get up to speed on the capital improvement plans and what's going on and get a better feel for the whole picture of this thing, it'll be much easier for us to kind of keep track of it and then issue a report in a more timely manner. Probably by, I don't know, we can pick a time, latter part of the year, I would think, in 2020 anyway.
And if I may, just real quick, we do have a schedule as city as a whole with regards to operating budgets and the capital budgets, final approvals, those sorts of things. So there's certain of those types of activities with the capital plan and operating and maintenance budgets. I think we would want to be running through this committee before it went to council, so we can kind of set those dates. You guys would have to decide how you wanted to make those recommendations, or what it looked like, if it's a report or something else. But so some of that we know. We discussed earlier the annual review of the integrated resource plan on the electrical side. We can set some dates to that and create a schedule for those types of things that we know we're going to be reporting on and sending on to City Council.
So Dennis, really quick, I just wanted to weigh in on this topic. First of all, I appreciate where you're coming from, George, because it feels like we need to demonstrate that we're accomplishing things, and then it's just a matter of what do we feel like we need to produce as a committee. And I do think it's premature to make any kind of recommendations or decisions, but at the very least, maybe what we should do as a committee is to put together some small report that says this is what's been accomplished to date, which may not be totally what that charter said, but it can at least show that quite a bit of progress is being made. Does that kind of get to where you're trying to establish some record of what we're accomplishing?
Just really quickly, I'd probably say the same thing. I think George and I had made some discussion on this. We had a pre-meeting with Dennis for the overall topic, and it was also recommended that we might look at having a subcommittee develop a report. So I think what we had looked at, and so maybe as we go through what he's discussing, it maybe we should have done it beforehand. So you know that at the end of this, we were suggesting to create a subcommittee, which I would believe would be 3 members, to write a report. What I was thinking about, and it had just briefly gone with George, so I'll just quickly and then let him finish, was that we would do maybe a small report that could go out in sometime in January. Just say exactly, this is what we've accomplished so far. We could also ask the council, is there something you'd prefer us to work on that we're not doing right now? Then next, so I think to answer your question, since my understanding is we were officially on the books June 1st or somewhere abouts that. It's still a little confusing, I think, is the way the resolution, but I believe we were on the books in June 1st. So theoretically, then we would be a year in at the end of May. So maybe we have a final report sometime in April or May of what we're trying to accomplish would be, that's what we were sort of thinking, sorry.
No, I agree. That's what we discussed. I didn't mention the subcommittee would be the next step, but if people had felt, well, there's no need to write any report, then I wasn't going to force a subcommittee or, I don't want to force the issue. It's just what I feel. I think you summarized my sentiments. Like, we owe it to the council to say, well, here's what we accomplished. It doesn't have to be the Supreme Court or a legal document or anything, but just something from them. And as Larry said, maybe trying to get some feedback from them. Is there anything they'd like us to look into, or how can we help them evaluate all these documents that are coming from the city, as well as giving our feedback to the city, and which we're doing here on a regular basis, but also reporting to them directly. So yeah,
if I may, I can add one to the list. Because I believe it was the CIP workshop. The mayor, I think, is interested in the potential for, does solar make sense as part of our, power portfolio. It could, and I think we should run those numbers and run that through this committee. He obviously is interested in that, and we hear it from the community quite a bit. 5 years ago, it didn't make sense. 3 years ago, it didn't make sense. It might make sense. There's some alternatives there that we could certainly take a look at and present to the committee as, something, if it's equal to our market purchases, then why not?
I think that's,
at least run the numbers and run it through the committee.
It's always good. It never hurts to review anything. But didn't the rate study say they were going to look at that too? I thought they were going to make a suggestion or two.
Not on the purchasing of solar.
I thought they said whether it was feasible or it was because I thought they'd said it as a blurb of some type today.
Yeah, they wouldn't. That would be something we'd have to run through. We'd have to use some different consultants.
Okay.
And we easily could do that.
Larry, I have a comment. I agree that we have to do reports and things like that. I understand all that, but I think even at this point, we have to report what we're doing. I think it's important to say we are learning a lot. It's important to say what we've learned and where this is going, because otherwise there's not going to be any trust in what our knowledge base is. So I think all of this, it's frustrating a little bit to sit here and go through this over and over again, but I feel it's necessary to learn how we're doing it, because we're not in a position to deconstruct any of the bills that we have, to look at what makes up a bill that someone gets. What do we look at? We're not even. I know we're headed that way, but I'm very much in favor of the subcommittee portion. I was thinking along the same lines, so I'm glad you've taken that approach, because I just feel like we haven't been. This is the first time I've been able to even hear any discussion about anything, because I was afraid we were just going to sit up here and just kind of get fed into our heads and then not be able to utilize it for any purpose. So I think that's a great approach, and but even if we just say it took us 3 months to understand the business we're about to do, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. because going forth, we'll have to stop that and start making decisions. So, but if we don't have the base for it, we're not going to be that. So I'm very much in favor of that, this approach, and see how we come out. So, because I'm just, the meeting so far is just, it's been good, but let's do something. And I don't think we can until we get through this, but we got to report that to council. So that's my thought.
Well, I want to give credit to George, because I think the reason we've all been, so first off, don't get me wrong, it's not that I've never been against reports, it's just that I didn't feel we had enough information to give a report. That's if I came across that
Agreed.
way.
No, I agree. No, I'm totally behind you on that, but and it's difficult for us to understand all the laws and stuff we have to be in compliance with, but it certainly seemed to me like the subcommittee could be a way to start this thing rolling.
I appreciate that, because George pushing and keeping it on trying to get it on the agenda with his tasks is where we haven't been there before. We haven't had time at the other meetings to say what we were going to get to, what we could get to, et cetera. So this is really the first time we've been able to discuss it. So it's not something anybody's been trying to push back on or anything like that. It's just a matter of getting to it. So that's the thing I want to finish with. So I want George to finish off on the things and figure out if we can all task. So I think to continue this is to try to get somewhat of a priority of the task, which will lead into later on our agenda items to what we want to do in the future, what we need to do sooner than later. So.
And if I may, just real quick, I've been involved with committees in Henderson and the city of Phoenix, and worked with the Water Authority. It's not unusual that there's many months of information being provided to the committees before you start essentially making recommendations. So it's not unusual. It's pretty normal.
Well, I'm getting a sense that there's sort of positive feedback on this idea, so that's encouraging. I didn't want to push it if no one else wanted to. A committee of one is less credible. A subcommittee of one is. So maybe we should form a subcommittee to do this report in January to inform along your lines, the council. Well, here's what we've accomplished so far, and just do you have any input like the solar? Or those kind of things, So to start a dialogue with the council and say, so we're not just have disappeared to them. And so, so I guess the next step might be, you're the chair, to maybe form a subcommittee or something. I'm happy to be on it, but if other people,
do we have to do a motion? Do we have to do a motion for that? Yep. Okay. So I guess first off, though, I guess before we do it, I think to do the motion, make sure that we have 3 people that are willing to work on it. So is anybody willing? George, we have George. Is anybody else be willing to work on that project?
Nobody. Okay, 2. Anybody else? Not
Okay, then I guess I'll be the third then. So, how would you comment?
No, I don't.
Okay, so I guess if we have 3 of us then, and then I make a motion that we create a subcommittee to put a report together for what we have, the information we have so far, and a brief report to the council to have it completed, I guess, sometime in January. And possibly then use that same committee, or if to the committee to go forward later.
So one thing I want to ask, though, is even though we'll have, let's presume that we have that subcommittee, will we make sure that all the committee members see? So if you want to address that.
Okay, first off, I guess to make sure we get the motion down, maybe we just, let's make it easier, so you're giving me the symbol. Let's make it just create a subcommittee for a report to City Council by the end of January. Does that sound reasonable?
Second.
Hang on, but we could, because then the committee then disappears. Maybe we can say just create a subcommittee to write a report to the council. Or do you want it to disappear in January? And then
no, it doesn't need that. I'm fine with that. Okay, so I'm sorry. So now, we get the motion down straight. We get a subcommittee established to write a report to City Council. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay, all this in favor, I think we, okay. Yeah. So, and then I guess if I understand correctly, then it will be Howard, myself, and George will be on the subcommittee.
And you can just let us know how you want staff support to provide whatever you need from us.
Okay. And
I would comment too, I don't think it needs to be a real long report.
No.
Nobody's going to read it if it's very
no,
long.
I'm thinking it could be,
Yeah.
it just could be a couple paragraphs, or it could be just
I think
maybe
that
one.
would be good.
In that case, staff is even more willing to help.
But to answer Keith's question, our definite would be is that a subcommittee does come back to regular committee. I don't think it does, nothing works without that. And so we would come back, and that's why it's going to be a little bit tough, I guess, to either do it by December, and we'd bring it into January's meeting, I guess. And then I guess it would be voted on, I suppose, correct? It'd have to be voted on. So the agenda item would I would suppose we'd have, if there's any chance of, it'd need to be on each, the December and the January agenda. So if any discussion was to be made, we would need that.
Yeah.
But it definitely is, and that's what I'm trying to do. When I ask for I'm always trying to keep everybody included. I want as much inclusion as possible.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head when you said some kind of a formal vote on it, because I think that would be good to have every member of the committee have some opportunity to weigh in on it, so.
Now, would we, I guess as far as the city's help, then would, we could possibly do it by January to do that, and for, I guess, an open meeting law, then the subcommittee would give something to the city, then the city would put it in the package, I suppose, so that the citizens could see then what we're looking at, and then go from there. That would.
Whatever support you need from the committee, we could provide that information. We could even assemble a report if you'd like, and then put that on a future agenda.
Well, yeah, this one, I agree with Ned. I think this one's going to be I don't see too much over a page. So this one should be easy to just send you a Word document or whatever and put it part of the package, so that way we could, just on the committee, committee would have it advanced to the meeting, and then it could be discussed and stuff like that.
I just had one more comment. The idea of the subcommittee actually came from the mayor because he has a lot of experience on these committees. It's difficult to write a report in this format. So the idea was 3 people not bound by the open meeting law would be able to just get together informally and put it together. But it's not the idea, of course, isn't an end run around the committee so I think it's totally appropriate that the committee votes on it, and now we've got 3, so I guess, but we can form other committees if people have concerns, or the anti-committee or whatever. But anyway, that was the idea. It wasn't a subterfuge. It was a way to get things done more efficiently.
Well, I would envision that as a preliminary report that was put together that we all had a chance to review before it ever went any further than that. And then the final report was what would be passed on and voted on.
Right. So I guess the ideal situation would be that we could do it by January, but if the process took longer to make sure everybody was fully comfortable with it, then it could go into February.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that, because right now we're just trying to do the best we can, and we're still, as Dennis's point, that's what my thing is, we're still learning, so we can't even pass on what knowledge we've gained quite yet either. So I think, but we go on. Now, did you have any more comments then on the items, George? Because we had 4 from the resolution, correct?
Yes. So annually review the capital improvement plan. You mean, is that what you're referring to, or?
I think we interrupted you before you finished, or did I misunderstand, and had you gone through all of them?
No. I was just emphasizing the capital improvement plan because that's the one that said annually review. The other one said review the revenue requirements and recommend rate adjustments, review the utility resource plans, review utility conservation plans and programs. But I think this is a start to see. So I agree with, it's sort of a compromise between trying to learn stuff and also trying to show the world that we're actually doing something. And maybe let's start with this mini committee and see if that works, if we can actually get it done, and then look at the other things maybe. This is a start, in other words.
Well, I think it's important, that's the reason this task, and I think if I'm understanding you were looking at keeping the timescales and the agenda items on all the agendas. Is that correct, George?
Oh, you mean to have item 5 as a recurring?
Yes, and item,
Sure, we can
and
do
item
that.
9.
For sure, item 9, yes, because I don't see how we can, item 9 I'm adamant about. Item 5 can come and go, I think, but I wanted it in that format
Okay.
of timescales, and now we have a timescale, we have a task, we've got one item. I don't want to push for much more detail until we get that item done, then maybe revisit it in January or February and say, now we've done this, what do we see as the next thing, the next report we want to submit?
Okay, because
Something like that, I don't know.
yeah, 'cause what I was understanding at one point was that you were looking at all, like I said, was there 4 or 5 of them that we're looking at items? And right now, we are reviewing the capital. We're trying to do our best to get an understanding of that. And we are doing the rate study.
Yes.
And we're doing that. So, right, the things that we were presented tonight in the package, we presented the IRP and we're in the water conservation. But since those don't have any major action items at this point, I just wanted to say that that's not something we need to rush into. And that was one thing I guess I was hearing, was that it was possibly that some of the group was thinking we'd need to rush into some of those things. And we've got too much going on to look at everything at once.
Yeah, I think people got the sense from me that I wanted all this next week, because it wasn't I just like to know where I'm heading.
No,
It's
and
sort of-
I think staff can draft kind of a schedule of when some of those events or some of those items would need to come forward to give something for the committee to work with, because we know certain things, tied to the budget and the city's schedule, and we can work around those. We talked about annually updating and timing on the integrated resource plans. We can put that together for the committee to work with.
That sounds good.
Just to conclude, I didn't come up with a massively detailed plan because I didn't know if anyone would agree with any of this, and then it seemed pointless to say, well, on August 15th, if we couldn't even get a subcommittee. So I feel we've got to start in what I consider a process, and let's see if we can, as 3 people, write a report, and if it works, this way of doing things. If it doesn't, then something else.
So I guess one way to do it, and to get some discussion from everybody, is George, would you want to put a draft together and then send it to myself and to Howard?
Sure, yeah, I can do
Are
that.
you comfortable with that, Howard? Or?
No, that's fine.
Okay, and then we can go and see if we want, because I think everybody's saying it's going to be brief, so this one should be pretty easy. And then we could possibly have something, so we don't really need a date. I don't necessarily get together as a subcommittee on this one. I think we just we could possibly, and I think it's within the meeting laws, we could even do it over email if we had to. We could meet, or we don't have to.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I could make a draft and circulate it, and then we don't have to meet, but I also think we can meet. We don't have to discuss that here, right? Because it's not an open meeting issue. The main thing is we bring back whatever we have to everybody to vote on.
Right, but right now, it would just be the 3 of us.
Yes.
And then I think the safest way is anything we're going to send to the full committee goes through this. The city would send it out, we would not.
Oh, okay, sure, yeah.
If I'm so I don't want to get,
Yeah, I don't know the rules. I don't know.
I'm not too sure that it shouldn't be any conversation, but the email seems to have the ability to have a conversation, so there is a problematic issue, if I understand correctly. I would feel safer at this point until somebody tells me differently that it goes through the city to be sent to the full committee.
I think that's the safest way to go. Yeah.
Does anybody have any issues with that? Okay, so just so it's clear, George will do a draft, send it to the 2 of us. We will then, I guess if we had something before the December meeting, we could send it to Dennis and have it ready for review.
Yes, yeah, I can do that. And I'm actually now thinking, so I'm thinking on my feet, but it was a bit of a struggle to get item 5 in this form on the agenda. So I'm now thinking, let's keep it there in this form so I don't have to try harder again to get it back on. So let's keep it as a recurring agenda item. It might be nothing, and then we just skip
over it.
So I think 5 and 9 should be recurring, yes.
And Vice Chair, if I may, I'm pretty sure I have some examples from some other utilities, if that would be helpful, of similar reports. I can send those to you.
Yes, that would be helpful. I'd rather stay within the format of what
Somebody else has already,
yeah.
why recreate the wheel? So, okay.
Well, thank you. I think that was one of the get to what you were saying, Howard, too, I think we actually were able to discuss something this time, and that's been the problem. I've had the same thing, too, is we've had between presentations, and it's nobody's fault, it's just we haven't really had a chance to discuss items. So that's why I do appreciate George, I do appreciate that aspect, just trying to get it on here so we can discuss things. And then we did get, I think there was a lot of confusion, and so now that we can at least get the confusion over with. Is there any other comments, George? Thanks for everybody's time on that. Okay, so I guess the next one, Dennis, is the utility rates. Yep, just any update?
Yeah, we kind of talked about some of this already, but just an update on where they are. We've been continually uploading lots and lots and lots of data. They're working diligently to make progress. We had originally thought that the first meeting in December we could provide more of an update with them. They have some other issues going on their end from a corporate standpoint. So what I would suggest is a workshop in December, if that's amenable to everyone. The dates I was looking at would be the 16th or the 17th of December, which is a Monday or Tuesday. And then I would need to verify with them as well, but we have Colorado River water users in the second week of December, and then of course council's the first meeting of December, and we have our meeting that they can't make, so that third week was making sense to me. Isn't it in the afternoon? Yeah, so we should be fine.
That's Tuesday, yeah. Monday's open.
The 17th won't work for me, but the 16th would.
I thought better of it.
I think on the safe side, we need to, is there 5 of us that are available, just to be, so we make sure that we have a quorum, because in case somebody isn't being able to make it. What date? December, I guess it looks like the 17th is the 16th, so Monday. Monday the 16th is probably the preferred one now.
And at what time? 6?
6 o'clock.
Okay.
So Howard?
I'm open. I'm ready.
Ned?
Yeah, I'm good.
And George? Okay, it looks so, and I think Eileen, I hope, is back, so we might have everybody.
Everybody here.
That would be great.
Okay.
To understand what's going on. And then are we going to look at possibly then doing the capital project
At
on
the
that
same
too?
time.
At the
Yep.
same time?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is that okay with everybody?
Yes.
So the more we can gain.
But while we're on item number 6, I do have a question. So I haven't been to all of the meetings, and I don't know if this was already discussed, but when we met I think it's Raftilis consultants, they passed out a survey, and I know that I filled it out and turned it in. Was that something that you received from other committee members, and did it also go to potentially like the city council members? Can you give us a status on the survey?
So it just went back to the council, to the consultant. They were just going to give you a high level, and they'll do that in December as well. We did not send it to council. We can certainly do that.
So each of the members of the committee did submit what?
I know we got at least 5.
Okay.
I don't remember if we got the other 2 or not, but we had at least 5.
Yeah, and I think
And again, they
Ned
don't-
was absent when we received the survey, so I don't know if you ever even saw the survey. So,
And again, that is more for them than anything else, just to kind of think what the committee's thinking. It doesn't really end up driving a whole lot. What really drives is when you start seeing real information. So it's really just them getting a feel for the community and what the committee thinks.
Yeah, that's what bothered me, was the slip between committee and community. They were saying we were sort of going to represent the community, and I was very uncomfortable with that, which is why I didn't submit it, because I don't think we're necessarily, with 11% below the poverty line, where are they in this survey? I mean, So I don't want to, so that's why I didn't do it, but it's fine. They can carry on and do their work if one person doesn't fill in a survey, but that's why I didn't do it.
No, I think we all had our hesitation on how being conceived that we had a major, we definitely, I don't think any of us here were saying that we're representing the citizens or the public, however you want to say it. So
I think it was more that you lit.
Yes, but so when they bring it back to us, that's, I think, where if they try to put too much emphasis on it, I would probably push back too. If they try to say they're going to steer the report around our comments, I think that would be troublesome. So, so we'll have to see how they bring it back. And now, was the city council being invited to this one also?
Was not planning on it, just because I think we're still in a working level. I would anticipate them being in the early part of the year. When we're getting closer to results, and I mean, we could, but I think it would be better if we're further along. Personally,
I don't have a problem. I had heard something about that was a possibility, so I wasn't sure.
I think you guys are making progress. I think, we're getting information to you with the conversation that happened on item, whatever that was, 5. I don't feel the need to bring them in yet, but we can do that at any time the committee would request. It's not a problem. I just feel like we should start making progress, and then I sense there'll be a time where we may feel like it's ready to maybe have a joint workshop.
Yeah, no problem. And definitely I wasn't asking for them to be, if I must have misunderstood what you said. It wasn't a matter of bringing them in because you said it wasn't a matter of what we're getting. It's a matter of just their being available to see what the same thing we did. But there was no emphasis on anything else at my comment. So was that was it for the rate study then?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now then, so let's see, we've got, so I guess we just have 2 more left. I was looking at having 8 being done after 9, but if it's probably gonna be a pretty relatively quick aspect, correct?
So what I would, for number 7?
Sorry, 7. Yeah, 7 is the next one. I skipped one. Sorry.
So number
7's
7,
an
we
important one, yes.
included in your package. Scope of work is there. I have Mr. John Osborne here from Brown and Caldwell. If you have any specific questions as to their scope, they do know the fact that we need information as fast as possible. We've already been providing them with data and information, and so he's here if you have any questions or have any questions from me. It does include, when we talk about the plants and the lift stations, it does include looking at structural, looking at mechanical, looking at electrical. It includes all the evaluation of the PRV stations, looking at the condition of the reservoirs, including the tanks that are out of service, because we may have to put some back in service, most specifically with regards to the raw water tank. So they'll, that's just kind of a high level view of their scope. To be, what's the Rolling Stones song? You can't always get what you want. So what we asked for was a lot more than we could afford. We had hoped for the condition assessment work, the 10-year CIP, a sewer model, and a asset management plan going forward. But that was more than we could afford. So we did get what we need for the capital plan, which is the condition assessment work and the 10-year capital improvement plan. So we'll be getting that out of them. We'll just figure out how to do the sewer model sometime later.
Question.
Fortunately, we're not growing very fast, so it's not an urgent need. It's just something that eventually the city of Boulder City should have.
So I had a question. The lift stations in Hemingway Valley, are they okay? I know they're probably 15 years old now, but are they getting worn out, or are they still functioning well? And
They've had a couple of minor issues. They're going to look at those in depth and in detail, as well as doing some assessment on the force mains. They do have backup generators at all three of them, so if you do lose a pump or do lose power, we're good. We are going to do a high-level capacity evaluation as part of this, just to make sure that growth that's happening, which I don't know if I call it, I know I shouldn't use the word growth, but with the additional demand that has occurred over the years on that side, are they sufficient capacity-wise? We will take a look at that. Right now, we're already in the middle of doing SCADA upgrades with the lift stations, and so I've been to all three. There's nothing there that makes me worried, like I can't sleep at night.
so how about the wastewater treatment plant? Is it operating okay? Are we going to look at new technologies, or is it sufficient?
It's for what we have to do with that water, an aerated lagoon process is perfectly fine.
Yeah, I would think if we can stay where we're at, would be money ahead.
If there's a need to drive it to a higher quality, that would be a whole other discussion. I think I did mention in one of our meetings, or maybe in the workshop, that SNWA has an interest in the return flow credit.
But they would pay for that, wouldn't they?
They would pay for that.
Okay.
They are going through their committee process that they just created last week. Their integrated resource planning committee, to look at their future capital program. They will be including a project in there for that. At this point, at this time, with minimal information, I wouldn't be able to make a recommendation or anything like that. They just did a high-level cost estimate for the capital for a pump station and a pipeline. But as far as the details on everything else that would look like in order to get it back into the river, and how the operating side of that equation would work, and obviously if you do that, you got to treat it to a higher level. So who pays for that? And those questions are still out there. It's real early in the process. So I don't know that it'll happen at the end of the day, but they're certainly looking at it.
I think the technology we're using for wastewater is pretty sound right now. If we're going to go to the river, back out to the lake or something, we're shooting ourselves in the foot in many ways. So just from manpower requirements and technology requirements and the people that have to operate it and so forth and so on, what we have now is a very good, reliable system that meets all the needs that we have for the discharge point we use. Yeah, return flow credits is a great thing.
Yep.
But at what cost?
Yeah, and that's the $100 million question is, what's the value of the return flow credit, and Howard's right. So, we've looked at this before, Boulder City, and they looked at various alternatives for reusing the effluent locally within the city, and each time they've done that analysis, the answer has been, don't do anything, just keep doing what you're doing. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's where we ended up, but, it can't hurt to look at it. They're the ones doing the evaluation, and we'll be bringing that back as we see more information.
I would think if we even looked at that, we would be better off to pump it over the hill to Henderson, let them dump it down into the system and treat it to the level they need and put it in the Las Vegas wash that way.
And Howard doesn't know this yet. But
You're not going to give it to me.
Howard doesn't know this yet, but that is that's what they are looking at right now.
I would think if that would make the most sense instead of any other way anyway.
Yeah, and not to get into the details, but there's even a couple of options with that. But again, stay tuned. It's real early in the conceptual stage.
I had at least two questions related to this. First off, is the contract been signed? So I guess, so when does the 6-month period start?
So no, the contract goes to council next Tuesday night.
Next Tuesday night?
Yep.
Okay, so if.
So I would anticipate, and I don't want to put words into Mr. Osborne's mouth, that they may not have the final report done, but we'll have enough of the data to develop the capital plan to get it in the program.
In the program?
Yeah.
Okay. And this one, actually, I might need from the gentleman, because I guess I'm a little confused, is in the statement on the first page of the project overview, it says that the assessment will be limited above ground only. And then further along, it talks about GIS, which I'm assuming the GIS data would be below ground. So if I'm understanding correctly, you're looking at field assessment of only above ground, but you will consider below ground with other means?
Yeah, we're not going to be doing any confined space entry, but we're going to be opening up. I believe there's 85 manholes that are in that list. We're going to be opening up those things. We're going to be doing evaluations from the surface and taking a look at those, but we're not going to be entering down in. But we're going to be, out on each one of the lift station sites. We're going to be taking a look at the odor control, PRVs, all of those other things. Certainly, most of your utilities are underground. And so the first stage of that is going to be a paper study of all of the as-builds and other things that are available with the city records, including maintenance, any repairs and other things. And that helps us kind of launch off into our field studies that go after that.
Right, and we also have video inspection data from when where and when we've televised the sewer, portions of the sewer system, so they'll be able to review that. And then we also have just what we know from our staff as far as hot spots that we would go take a look at, or because we know there's some corrosion or something going on in a certain manhole. But so it's not totally limited, but it's really just saving the time of them actually climbing down in the manhole and costing more money.
Do we have any more transite mains, sewer mains? I know we had some that were collapsing.
We have a fair amount.
And do we know what the condition of those is, or are they all in pretty good shape? Or the roof
so our break history on the transite is actually, from everything I know, is not horrific. We don't see a litany of breaks on the transite. According to our water and sewer supervisor, we don't like working on it necessarily all that much, but it's a pretty solid product. It's been around a long time. It's one of those types of rigid pipe material that if you don't mess with it, and was constructed properly with the right bedding and the right trenching, it can last a long time. But it's just like anything with small diameter pipe, until you start getting significant breaks and information that leads you to believe you got a problem, there's no way of telling until it happens.
Well, what I'm thinking is I know that on the Buchanan main that went down to the wastewater treatment plant, it was transite, but I think they had the hydrogen sulfide gas problem in the top half of the pipe was pretty well eroded away, and they had to go in and reline it. Do we have any others like that?
They did. They went in and they slip lined that sewer itself and got that taken care of. Most of them that we're aware of are primarily mostly related to manholes.
Okay.
They're not pipe condition issues, which is good.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, dealing with contracts quite a bit, that this just, I know the intent wasn't there, but having that, it's sort of an open-ended aspect that only above ground would be reviewed.
Obviously, utilities are all underground, so the intent is we're going to have a comprehensive look at what's going on from all the record data, and then whatever we can pick up in the field from the surface.
Okay. I believe from the comment period, I guess I had sort of a similar aspect. Two things happened. Like when on the last part of your contract, it says the base services base services will be 399,000, and the contract says it'll be for 400,000 only. And so when somebody says base services, usually there's other factors involved, and being that there isn't any, I guess, so-called fudge factor, is there been any discussion on if there's something found that is more than the 400,000, what would happen?
No, because it was kind of the backward negotiation because we asked for more than we could afford, and we had to bring it back down. So if there's something like that, we'd just have to, if we found something or we wanted them to go into more depth or detail on something significant, we'd have to amend the contract or hire somebody else.
Is that sort of an average, though, with your comment that base charge, I guess, the
Yeah,
base services?
the basic services would be a typical contract with an additional services available upon approval if there were any changes, as Dennis alluded to. That would have to be addressed if, we came across something through our assessment efforts that really was alarming, that the city would really want to take a deeper look into, then we would have to address that then.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where the contract and the
I understand,
doesn't
and
completely jive.
I don't anticipate it in this case. Doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but I think we can manage within the value, the price of that contract. With regards to that.
It looked good. It was just a few little technical, being a contracts person, little things that put up flags.
Sure.
I think that's the major things I had. Anybody else have any? Okay. Thank you then.
You're welcome.
I was hoping you'd grill them a little harder, but that's...
I think so I guess, so do you have any additional comments, Dennis, on that assessment?
No, do not.
Okay, so I guess, I'm sorry, I did have one more comment, because the way that the scope of work is done, it looks like the intent of most of the workshops are with the city staff and not the committee, because you're gonna have certain details that you're gonna get into. I think into the weeds where we don't necessarily be. But how many meetings are you looking at or would it be? Because again, sometimes these meetings we have time for it, and sometimes we don't have time to go into major discussion on these type of items.
I think we can plan it out so that we could come back once we have sufficient information, say depending on what portion of the water system we look at, the lift station we look at, the consultant can provide some inputs to the committee as we move through the project just on a regular basis. And they don't have to be, it can be a 15-minute update if need be on a regular meeting. And then if there's significant work we see that just requires a workshop or something like that, we can schedule that as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think because this is new for all of us as far as how we're interacting with the city, et cetera. So I think to make sure that we have a look at some of the issues, just keep an idea.
I don't see a problem with that at all.
Okay, thank you. So I guess now we're on to number 8 and on the water conservation.
Number 8 is the joint water conservation plan. We really put it in there for your review, and essentially the plan itself, if you go through it and you'll have some time between now and December, it does outline what's new to the plan versus what was originally in the plan when it was approved. It is a 5-year requirement to redo the plan and submit it to the state with all the Southern Nevada cities, including Boulder City. We're fortunate because it's a joint plan, so the Water Authority does most of the heavy lifting, putting the plan together. Certainly take a hard look at it. It does need to go to council that same December because we're at the end of the 5 years. And so now that this will be one that we can add to our future plan. We know we have to do something 5 years. And the other reason I kind of threw it in there is something for the committee to start thinking about as far as In fact, the gentleman brought it up in public comment. Do we want to start taking a harder look at city facilities? Is that something this committee would want to discuss further and potentially make some recommendation on? We know we are talking about redoing the irrigation system and maybe taking advantage of some of the Southern Nevada Water Authority rebate programs on the golf course. But do we want to start taking a little harder look at turf at parks, medians? You know, it's kind of one of those things that I think staff would really prefer to get feedback from both the committee and potentially the city council on if we want to delve further into those types of programs. Frankly, it does take a hard look at new development as far as those requirements, but we don't have a lot of that. So really, where we would, as a city, could potentially and most likely, obviously, reduce our demand would be looking at the city facilities and seeing if there's opportunities there.
I think if
That's not necessarily tied to this plan directly. It's just moving forward, something I think the committee should discuss and think about.
well, I would think that we would be definitely up to reviewing whatever you'd like to put in front of us.
Sure.
I think that's what we're here for. So if there's something the city would want to include us in, I think.
Yeah, we can do that. So, but as an example, along Hemingway Wash, they're looking at some different type of turf, testing it out. If that has, if that bears fruit, then I think that something that could come back to the committee, because, everybody likes the turf along the wash there, but, you got to irrigate it. So if we can find something that's acceptable that uses less water, then that's a good solution as well.
Looking back, I know that's been for years, that was always a little bit of a controversial thing, whether it was worth it or not. But I've lived through a couple of floods down there when the water overran the banks. And that grass held where just about anything else didn't hold. And it tore that place up really bad. I mean, probably 25 years ago. Before they had grass, then they put grass in, and the grass really made a difference.
Yeah.
So we may want to take a hard look at that before we make any hard decisions on that.
Yeah, and they're just talking about a different type of turf. It's still
Okay,
but
that Bermuda goes real deep. That's the thing. It's got deep roots.
Yes, it does.
That sounds good. I think that's, because it sounds like, I think that was one of the things, to go back a little bit with the tasks, was that I think, at least I was hoping that once we did get better educated, then possibly after the first of the year, we would start seeing more opportunities that we could interact.
I think that's one that needs work, from a demand management and, doing our job as, utility directors on my side, where we could find ways to save, we should be looking at that. So I think the staff can work over the next 2 or 3 months and put together kind of a conceptual plan of areas and locations that maybe we delve into working with the water authority and what that, what might be out there with regards to turf management or turf removal and replacement with, xeriscape. I know a lot of the other, or not a lot, but the other communities over the hill did a lot of assessments on their parks to remove a lot of the perimeter landscaping so you didn't have all the runoff going into the street. So those are things that we could certainly take a look at. But yeah, the staff can kind of generate something for the committee to conceptually take a look at, and then once we start rolling with it, we could dive deeper.
I just have the inevitable comment, but I think the projections into the future of water are wildly optimistic. They're basing their things on. The Bureau of Reclamation in their 2012 supply and demand study predicted that by 2019 now, we'd be back at the 10-year running average for the last 10 years would be 15 million acre feet. We'd be back to normal. That has absolutely not happened. And in fact, in order to get that 10-year running average from 2012 to 2019 back to normal, they had to project that the river flows would in fact be way above normal, 18 million acre feet. That, I don't want to be, so I won't be disrespectful, but I respectfully find that means they're not capable of modeling. There's something wrong with the modeling. And so we ought to be careful as a community if we trust these models and say, well, everything's going to be okay, we just have to make minor adjustments. That's not what the data are telling us. And we need to, this is beyond the scope of this committee, but I keep going on about this. I think we need to look at the modeling much more carefully to evaluate the risk, which I think are much higher to our community than are suggested by these data that they're presenting.
Well, I guess, well, that's one of the things, there's a difference between a conservation plan and risk. So maybe we need to look at both, I would think. I think our aspect says the conservation plan, but I think a risk analysis or understanding if we are at risk with water, I guess we need to make sure that we haven't really had a chance to go to water because being that the electrical is the bigger aspect, and I think I probably pushed for electrical, but maybe we do need to get a better understanding of water a little bit. I think the presentation you showed in the past did have a lot about the water, but it still seems to be a little confusing on exactly what our quota is and how much we're using and if we are even close to our demand or not. So I guess, so are we close to our demand or not?
We are not. It depends on how big I make the y-axis, right? But the reality is we have spare capacity in the SNWA delivery system, and what we don't have is a second pipe or a second source. It all comes up through the pump stations, through the single pipeline to Boulder City, and so that's where your question of risk comes in. Now, they've done condition assessment work, they've done upgrades to the pump stations, they've done quite a few electrical upgrades because those pump stations are older, but it still comes down to you have one pipeline delivering water to Boulder City. That being said, the Southern Nevada Water Authority has made some provisions for being able to quickly, and when I say quickly, within a number of days, it wouldn't be immediately, you could deliver treated water through that raw water pipeline. There's still some details to work out there, but that has some potential. That if something bad did happen on the potable side, you could do, clearly it takes time. You got to drain the pipe, you got to fill the pipe, you got to disinfect the pipe before you can start delivering it to customers. But it's better than nothing. So that's.
Well, if I don't think we're at any risk with what we can discuss in public as far as terrorism or thing, as far as revealing what our risk aspect is to it. But I guess it would be nice to know how much water we have in the reservoirs. And so if you got enough water in the reservoirs to cover what it would take to get in with the raw pipe, then that would be something that,
yeah,
it would
and
cover.
the answer to that is it would be real close. What you would probably have to do is go turn all of your parks off during that period, because it's period, but it would be during the peak demand period in the summer, right? So that's when it's a real issue.
Gotcha.
And your storage is limited.
Well, I think that's...
But yeah, we can bring that stuff back and have more discussion on the water side for sure.
Well, I think that's what I've been looking at. I think we sort of brought up today was this is the really first time we really had time to discuss almost any issue. We've been trying to learn, and so we really haven't had a time to discuss. So even some of the comments you're making, we haven't been able to work as a committee. So I think that's one thing maybe we can bring up in our next part of the agenda is how do we get to more of a discussion aspect of these issues, but we still need a certain amount of knowledge to go forward with. I think would be helpful.
I just said, so when I was thinking of risk, I was thinking more of long-term risk, and there is, well, I think we have 15,000 acre feet allocated within the system. There are 2 contracts. I've tried to look this up, but actually talking to the gentleman, the scientist from the Colorado River Commission, I think, But anyway, he said 15,000, and then we used 10,000, and so one might be tempted to say, well, so we got plenty, we can increase our water usage, but that water, when you look at the basin overall, that the allocated water doesn't exist. And so, because you have 7.5 upper basin, 7.5 lower basin, 1.5 million acre feet to Mexico, an extra 1 million to the metropolitan district, and so you're almost getting at 18 million acre feet a year, and the system's delivering 12 or 13. So I think it's an illusion if we in Boulder City say, well, we can increase our water usage up to this limit. I don't know the details, but it wouldn't be responsible, and I don't see how that's going to work, because I don't think that water exists, the water we're legally entitled to, but it's just a comment.
I guess anybody else on comments on the water conservation? So it's a real, when I have to admit, I wasn't able to get through all of the documents.
And I probably should have told you when we sent it, we weren't expecting you to delve into it, between when we uploaded it in this meeting. It's just kind of one of those things that cropped up, and we're like, oh, we got to get this done, so.
Well, the problem though is if you're asking for input by next December even, what I did get to was a lot of it was mostly related to S&W, not really Boulder City itself. So would I be correct in saying that to go through it, and then if we find anything that points out Boulder City related, is that really, because I'm not sure that Boulder City is going to push back to S&W and say we don't think this is right for the state.
And frankly, there's nothing in there that's the only thing that has any impact to Boulder City is the added development, which, the city, I think, would be fine with. So basically, the way, some of you were probably here when the general manager, John Ensminger, was here, the way that we'll be revising ordinances in the future for new residential developments or any developments is, and it'll obviously be a little more complicated than this, but we're trying to not put in turf that's not, so if the only guy, I think what he said, if the only guy that's on that turf is the guy mowing it, then it shouldn't be there with regards to new development. So that's really the only Boulder City thing that's in there. But all the cities are, going to move forward with those types of revisions to their development codes. So I don't see that as being significant.
Again, I think he was being it's hard to say someone's being misleading about the future because it hasn't happened yet. So you can't say, well, he was right or wrong, but he said, we're fine for the next 50 years. We can keep doing what we've been doing. I respectfully disagree. Time will tell whether he's right or I'm right. But I don't think we can keep this kind of development we've been doing in Las Vegas, notwithstanding the figures they've presented. Now, of course, Boulder City already has these growth limits, which are strongly supported by the community, which is great. But all I can say is I just disagreed with his rep. He was very optimistic, I think, in his presentation. And the then mayor, concluded, well, we're fine for the next 50 years. No worries. It's like, no. There's another version of that which says kind of the opposite.
Okay, so are you looking, though, I guess, just because you would have more comments than any of us, I believe, on this document then. What are you looking for? Because if you want something to take to council.
I don't, before there was a committee, it would have just gone straight to council, right? So again, I think it's good for the council to know that that the committee reviewed it and doesn't have any significant issues. I guess, however you want to couch those
one member has issues, but that's not the whole committee, so I don't want to speak
right,
on behalf of the committee.
And I would say that would be a different conversation when we brought forth the water resource plan. And that, I think, if there was a comment then that would make sense to me. And because we do, so the SNWA prepares a water resource plan as well as a water budget independent of the conservation plan. And I think those comments would be valid as it relates to the water resource plan, if that makes sense.
For sure, and I'd certainly be interested, I mean, if we ever have these meetings with the water people, I'd be interested to see whether they disagree with what I'm saying. And
so, that being said, we could certainly invite them to do a presentation at the December meeting, see if they're available. It would probably be more related to this conservation plan for that meeting, but in the future, when the water resource plan was moving forward through whatever modifications they're making to that, and then they could come and talk about that as well.
Let's sort of a lead into the next one. Let's look at our agenda items going forward, because if we, I think we need to sort of probably to see how many presentations we want and how much we can have conversation and stuff like that. If we end up with a lengthy presentation, it really hampers, because I think we might end up, depending on how much the next one, end up in a reasonable meeting time tonight. So we end up with some lengthy presentations, which I'm all for if it helps us, but if it's not really bringing us to another conclusion, and maybe it's too late, December might, because we should be coming back with recommendations and not making a decision then, I think. So we'd have to wait till after after the presentation to make our final aspect, which is possible. But let's get after 9, when we finish 9 and decide what we think might be doable the next couple, then we can decide if that's something we want to do then or do later.
Yeah.
But a suggestion for George is that we could state that we believe this plan, if we see any flaws for Boulder City, we could state that, but if you say there's a flaw for Southern Nevada, then you want to say that it's for Southern Nevada, you can say something like that, so then the city council would understand. They have the option then.
Right.
It would just be another educational aspect. I think that's what we're all about, right? If we have information that might not be in their wheelhouse, then that's what we would be taking forward. So you have things that you could take forward to the council.
Yeah, and like I said, I think the water resource plan is probably the best place to make that type of commentary.
Because I don't disagree that a 50-year statement about 50 years could be problematic, but we don't want to necessarily fight a lot of the issues either. But I guess be careful into stating. They should be careful into stating how much we do. But a lot of you, some of you know this, but I was. In my former life, I was smack dab in the middle of the development of the conservation plan, the regional conservation plan, and it is certainly one of the most aggressive in the country. There's no doubt about that, and that wasn't just SNWA. That was folks from Boulder City and Henderson and City of Las Vegas and the county that all went through some pretty difficult political challenges from both the development community as well as golf course community and those types of things. So it's certainly, I think, a very solid conservation plan. What really the Water Authority saw was the gallon per capita per day was kind of leveling off. It had since 2000 when the drought started and they developed that plan, you could see the demand management working, and the gallons per capita per day was dropping at a pretty good rate. And then over the last 4 or 5 years, it kind of leveled off. And so, they're obviously looking towards a goal, and I can't remember exactly what the number in there is, and so they're pushing that conservation program harder, and I think as a community, we would agree with that.
I mean, we can go on and on about this, but we use 600 gallons per person per day in Boulder City, which is 10 times the national average. So, we can say, I can tell you I'm a genius too. I mean, the question is whether people believe Mrs. Mulroy when she's a world expert. I mean, I shouldn't name people, but anyway, the heads of the... I don't see those numbers for Boulder City. They're just not there. Now, if I'm being unfair, I'm taking the total amount of water we use and dividing it by the number of people. You might say, well, the golf courses don't count, but for nature, they do. Nature doesn't care. This is this many people. Anyway, we can go on all night, you know.
And I'm not disagreeing. I think that goes back to the conversation as what role does Boulder City play within the community itself? Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're done with the conservation, so we'll do our best we can to go through that and see if anybody has any comments. And that's one thing I guess I would suggest is that if we had comments for Boulder City, maybe state it that way, and comments for the Southern Nevada type thing, just as an educational. I don't think that's quite in my wheelhouse, but we'll see what happens. So I guess then the last one before the public comment is discussion on possible recommendations regarding future agenda items. So I guess I think what I'll do is start with the committee members and then ask you. I know Dennis, you have a lot of, and you've given us some examples. But did anybody take any time or have any ideas to go with for future action agenda items?
When is the bid supposed to close on the Boulder City Tap to Buchanan sub-trans line? When's that bid supposed to close?
So the bid, are you talking about the design build contract?
Yeah.
They
Yeah,
opened.
Yeah.
So they opened, we got 2 proposals. Also Sturgeon. Sturgeon was one of them, and Par Electrical was the second one.
Okay.
So we're reviewing those. We will be reviewing those. We just opened them last Thursday, I believe.
Are both of those bidders amicable to breaking it up into 2 phases or 2 sections?
I think both of those bidders would be amicable to doing whatever we ask them to do.
Well, the reason I'm asking, because we're slated to have the Boulder City Tap transformer, the old one, shut off to where we can work on the primary circuit, the 230 kV lines, and that would be a very appropriate time to get the poles set and the new lines strung.
Yeah, and we've internally had that discussion about phasing it exactly that way.
But that would be a smaller bite of the apple to take on and get at least to substation 3 to be able for us, the city, to test that transformer at a fairly decent load.
Yeah, and frankly, it's an easier piece to do.
And then the next question is, I noticed in the bid packet that they're talking about 12 kV circuits being strung on the lower side of those poles coming down. Are we anticipating doing that from the Boulder City Tap to substation 3 also, 12 kV circuits?
Just for 3 existing circuits that are there.
Well, the reason being because you got a tertiary winding on that transformer at 20 MVA at 12 kV. And that's a waste of power that's just sitting there. And if we don't use it, I highly recommend we put caps on those bushings to where the birds and stuff like that don't land on them and short it out.
I got you.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. We need to build a 12 kV switch rack at Boulder City Tap to where we can utilize it if we need to.
Well, is that something we can discuss? So is that one of the things that's possible? Because we were discussing capital projects for next time, or the workshop even, and that would be something that would be either at the meeting or at the workshop to discuss that specific project, I guess.
It's a better number for fuzzy math. If you're talking between $8 million and $9 million and you've got the bids opened up and you now know what the 2 bidders are giving for a price, then now you've got a way to put another number into the budget.
So I guess, I think I might have misunderstood. Do we have time in December, or is it going to be too late? The decision would already have to be made by the next meeting we have for recommendations on that project.
I don't know if I can give you a good answer on that. I think just like anything else, as we work through the process with the contractor, we can consider it and see what it looks like, and then just have that discussion. Like I said, we just open bids. It's really to select the most qualified one, and then you enter into negotiations, and that's where it's going to take that. That's where we would take that into consideration, which, you know, we can certainly work through that process.
You know, and I wasn't aware of this, tertiary lining on that, but it might be that if we can, we get taller poles or poles anyway that could accommodate a future 12 kV circuit underbuild on those poles. I mean, I don't know. That's something to look at anyway before we go too far down the pike here.
Well, I guess that's the thing. I think that's where we still, and like I said, I know I'm having confusion, is I think some of us sort of believe that there was the intent for this committee to look at some of that, and some of that seems to be that's not necessarily in our preview. And so some people think that we're getting into the weeds, but if we can help the city save money, I think that's part of what we're trying to do. So it's a point and we're trying to learn, so this is where it's confusing, is what can be brought to the committee now and what would be done later. So this is a project that if we're saying, okay, is this going to be an $8 million project or a $9 million project, is that already decided, or is that going to be decided in a couple weeks, a couple months? That's the type of, I'm hearing properly from some people. So can we have some input to say, there's knowledge up here that would be able to help with that? Can at least some of that stuff be looked at? So instead of getting to a point where it's like, well, that would have been nice to do, but we're past that point and we can't do that anymore. That's the one thing I definitely would like to.
I guess from my perspective, if the question's asked, we can get an answer to that question. And, you know, depending on what it is, you know, it would have to, it's really going to be a consideration of cost, right? On those types of, or could be, doesn't have to be. It could just be a improvement that was no cost.
But it all depends on how the contract is written.
You know,
because in some of the, if it's a contract's pretty specific, then there would be no room for additional
right. So we would
changes.
be asking that question during the negotiations.
So that you're still. So I'm just trying to make sure I understand.
No, we haven't. We just opened the proposals. We haven't even. You know, we haven't had a conversation with either one of the vendors.
Because I think if I'm understanding correctly, then this would be a good test for the committee.
I think we always talk about it anyway.
Yeah, so I think that's what we're asking for, is if we can be part of that process, however best we can be.
Yeah, we just have to figure out what that looks like, but yeah.
So I guess the first thing that is the first we need to do is put it on the agenda. So that's an agenda item for next time, is I guess just specifically that contract or that project. If we can put that on. We would like to see that on the agenda for next December, for December's meeting.
What I'm trying to do is, if we're doing a design build and the city is designing, I want to make sure that the city's designing it to where it can be built most efficiently. So if you're going to do an underbuild on the 69 kV pole, you can throw 2 sets of cross arms up per pole and be done with it, and then string it later. But right now in the bid proposal, it said you will use this type of cable or conductor for the primary 69 kV, and you will use this type of aluminum ACSR cable for the 12 kV circuit. My problem is guess what? There's 2 sizes of that same conductor. Which one are we going to use? The better one or the cheaper one?
The better one.
Well, no, it's not in the contract.
Right.
And that's the problem I've got. When you write a contract with that broad a scope, and you're looking for an ACSR cable, pardon me getting into the weeds, that is not really rated for the tension or the wind load, okay, you've got to make certain that we get the right cable for the job. And if we're going to have to buy cross arms, it's a heck of a lot easier to put a cross arm up on a pole on the ground than it is 45, 50 feet in the air. So that's all I'm trying to do, is eliminate the possibility of us having to go back and second step everything that we've already done.
Yep. No, the intent is to only do this once.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
So between our earlier agenda items, I think the big thing we are looking at is capital programs. That's a big issue. for, so if we have that on there, and then maybe we could say, as a way to do it, would be to have the capital project agenda item as a general. Then if we have can we do like a sub, so we could put the BC tap to Buchanan under there as a sub one, because you're going to want the capital program so we can discuss general aspects, and then we'd like to discuss this, so it helps us and you to know what to bring forward.
I think that's perfectly fine.
Okay, so then, is there any other sub-items under the capital that anybody would like to ask for December? Okay. Then, so we've got the rate study will be a general item on the agendas. Let's see. Hey, okay, I'm bringing it up again. So does anybody else on the committee have had thoughts on the agenda?
I did not.
Okay, so then I guess before I get into it then, Dennis, you've over the times have brought different things. Is there anything you had thought for tonight to help?
For the next meeting, let me look at my notes. The only thing I could see there again would be the water conservation plan, if we wanted to give it some sort of blessing in December. I don't think we would be ready to start talking about the FY21 O&M budget until January. So I don't think that would happen at the December meeting. So I think that's it from my perspective. The CIP, obviously, we talked about, and then the SWA water conservation plan. And I think from our perspective, then whatever else the committee would like, I think that's the only thing staff has for December.
So we're just, I guess it would be possible action then for the conservation plan?
Correct.
Any comments or voted on what we believe the committee would have a recommendation, if there's a recommendation?
Yep.
So possible action, that's a good one.
So I had a question again, because I read through a lot of that conservation plan from SNWA, and they had a lot of, fairly stringent conservation programs that talked like they were addressing down there, but that doesn't necessarily translate to us as well. Is that what you're saying? A lot of those plans?
So I think what I'm saying is I'm trying to be nice with how I say this, or politically correct. They've been more aggressive in the valley.
Yes. Yeah,
than Boulder City has.
But we don't have to be quite as aggressive over here, huh?
Well, that's something I think that's
well,
a good, that I think is the discussion for this committee.
I think we need to realize that water sales are a revenue source for the city. Mm-hmm. And we actually have water that we're not using that Las Vegas does use. They can use if they would like, but we can pull it back. But if we reduce our usage too much, then it's going to start impacting our revenue stream too. So we need to look at it from that standpoint. So
that's always it's that vicious cycle.
There's a fine balance there.
Yep.
I mean,
yeah, I think that's where it is very important to understand what is exactly our contracted amount of water. Because
we can bring that we could have that on the next meeting.
Oh, that would be nice.
Yep, we can have that.
Because I think it is. You got a good point, because if we reduce our amount, the way I understand that was the contract, it was anything we don't use, Vegas gets.
exactly.
And if we reduce our conservation too much, we're liable to never get our water back. And so there is a certain amount that I totally agree that there's conservation needs that we need to do, but it is something I think that should be considered and discussed without going to the full extreme. So just something that we have to keep in mind. So,
but as an example, we don't have people driving around in vehicles aggressively hunting down water waste. We just don't have those resources. Well, they have those resources in the valley, so that's a difference. This is an example of a difference. That doesn't mean we don't respond to water waste complaints. It's just a different level of approach.
Right, but I believe it was actually termed the water czar. 10, 20 years ago.
Is that all right?
No, there was somebody that was here in Boulder City. They had hired somebody to do that, be more aggressive, and I think that position though wasn't maintained. I can't remember what happened, but that was my understanding. So I think that's when some people do look at this, not really understanding what role does Boulder City have. I don't believe we have that now, but I believe there was at one time.
Okay.
There was it was being ramped up to do that. Put it that way.
So we'll have an item on the water contract itself.
Okay. Yeah, it's something we definitely need to look at, and it's not an easy conversation. That's totally true. It's not something because I think in the draft you had it under Southern Nevada Water Authority, but facilities and operations, and so that I think that would be a good. So with the assessment, then we should be learning more about the facilities with the water and the sewer. And then we had just a really brief aspect with the electrical tonight and a few things. So would we want to have more? I'm wondering how we bring the facilities and operations. Operations, I think, would be how things are operated might be helpful in the near future. So would we want to do like a facilities and operations for the three main utilities, the water, the electrical, and the wastewater? Is that something that would be feasible?
I zoned out.
I'm not sure exactly. Guess I'm not sure exactly what you're asking.
Well, I'm trying to make sure I understand. So when I'm thinking of facilities, I'm thinking, okay, so we're looking at the overall transmission lines. We're looking at the substations. We're looking at what makes up, what's the major things, and what is the major operation of the water utility? What is the major operation of the electrical? So we got a good overview, but now we do sort of need to get down. We don't need to get in the weeds, but we need to go another step down, I believe.
Well, and we certainly have spent more time on the electrical than we have on water and sewer, other than some high-level bullet points in a presentation, 2 months ago. I don't think that would take a tremendous amount of time. I mean, the reality on the water system operationally is it's not overly complicated because the water authority pumps up to the top and we gravity everything down. So from that perspective, that doesn't take a lot of time to explain and show on maps. We can certainly show the SNWA delivery facilities and where those pump stations are located, just so everybody knows, and what the capacity of those are versus what's in our contract. Same thing on the raw water side. We can provide some of that more detailed information as far as because we basically on the water side, we it was based on a certain capacity. Oops. So that's pretty straightforward. I don't think that would take a lot of time. On the sewer side, we have 3 lift stations, the force mains associated with that, and everything else is gravity fed to the treatment plant. So not overly complicated. So I think we could present both if we wanted to just kind of delve down into the water and sewer side at the next meeting. We could do that, I think, pretty quickly. Even the plant itself, you went out there, Greg, it's not overly complicated. It's an aerated lagoon plant. We can talk a little bit about the treatment process and obviously the amount that's delivered to the quarry and the amount that is delivered to nature. And I think that would be fine at the December meeting if that's something this committee would like to see.
The other thing I'm thinking about is the old water and power building that was just completely repainted and the windows were fixed and everything else. And we touched upon water conservation. The landscaping around that is nil and it looks really bad. And is that one of our first buildings coming into town that's owned by the city? We've put a new roof on it, we've done the flashing, we've done the painting, we fixed the windows. Is anybody given any consideration to that being a water conservation model for planting? In other words, something to make it look like, okay, we as a city have decided to take and redo our landscaping around our buildings that the city owns and make them a little bit more appealing or pleasing. They took out the grass, they took out the elm trees, they stripped out the vegetation. It's just all barren, and it's really looking pretty bad as a city building. And I was wondering if we could talk about that at the next meeting, or maybe introduce an idea to let the gardening group of Boulder City take that on as a possible plan or a design and see what they can come up with.
I can certainly find out if our landscape folks have any plans moving forward. I'm not aware of anything, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. And then go from there.
Okay, and the other thing is, we as a city have a handhole on the corner of that alley and Nevada Way that is just in decrepit repair. It's owned by the USBR, US Bureau of Reclamation. It's a communication vault, and I watched a guy stumble over the plate the other morning because it's rotted and it's buckled up. So I don't know if USBR still has communication lines going down through that alley, or if that's now been turned over to Boulder City, but that, along with some of the landscaping, needs some attention. And that would be something that we might want to take and get a little research from the city, and then come back in December and discuss possible ideas or plans to make that kind of like a showcase for our water conservation landscaping ideas.
That's a feed.
And it's live.
It's just a communication.
Oh.
Well, so we could maybe we should just start a converse.
Well, if you if you take that a step further, that would, I don't know what that would cost. If that's something they parks could do in their operating budget, or it would be something that have to go in the capital plan. I don't know the answer to that because I'm not sure how I guess I haven't paid that much attention to the building, to be honest with you. So.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because the city is running their trucks down that alley to store stuff in that warehouse that Water and Power used to own. And those 10,000 or 15,000 pound trucks, dualies, are shortcutting across that plate. And that plate's not going to be much longer before the truck falls in.
Yeah.
Well, if we, I think the key issue is how much time we have. But if we can set up some aspects where we do a 15-minute discussion or something on conservations, because you had I'm not sure if it's as prominent as it was, but there was the water conservation or the desert landscaping off of Buchanan. Well, DRI, but there was one off of down by on the other side of the road, farther down by the parks. They used to have a small little area that was supposed to be a Zero-Scape Park. Thank you. And I'm not sure that really was kept in, huh?
That's firewood.
Okay, so it's not there. But when you talked about the turf and stuff like that, then that's, there's different places that are trying to do things. The library is looking at ways to do better, and library is separate from the city. So it's confusing, but if we had an area to point to say this is what it looks like with this type of thing, or the city finds a turf that works, then these would be great things to go forward with that are city and non-city properties to at least suggest. And if we maybe look at even bringing back a Zero-Scape type thing or something, so showcasing it, and so maybe having conservation, if we could even just have it on an agenda that we can say, do we have anything new that we can discuss, might be a way to do it. So it's not a matter that we have a lot of time to go with conservation, but keep it moving forward. Because right now we're looking at, so we got capital, the rate study, the assessment, conservation. and then still learning, because I'm just going off, that's what, the facility and operations, what was a suggestion on one of the agenda items, and that's what I was going off of. And I was just trying to figure out ways that we'd understand the city better. That's what I'm just trying to figure out, how we can get there faster. So a little, I think it might be some of the stuff, maybe we're better off having some presentations, but maybe better off having small little tidbits, so we don't have an hour presentation that takes up too much of the meetings time. I'm willing to do both, but I'm still, like I said in the past, we want to do parallel. We need to keep working with so now we have the rate study and the assessment we have to work with, and we're still trying to learn. We need to find a way to do both.
So are you asking for something like how many people would they have in the department or the section or whatever they're gonna call it? Budget, how many work orders they have, work orders closed, how deep do you want this to go?
No, I don't think we need, I don't think we want to
know,
go.
I mean, if you know how they operate, that's gonna tell you how to operate, but do we wanna, maybe we make it to 20 minutes or something where, give us the highlights of how many work orders have you had in a year, how many do you close, how's your backlog, gives us some fair idea of where they're at. Because otherwise, I mean, I don't know how far you want to take it down. Because otherwise, that's the point. You know, I think you got a good idea, but let's decide to what level we need to know to ask more questions. And do we want a good overview? And that's going to take each department, that'd be that'd be an hour and a half. You know, is it be an hour and a half, or you limit it to just 1 hour? So,
Well, and that's the problem. That's what we said before, was that we have limited time. We were trying to keep these at 2-hour meetings, and we're lucky to do it under 3. But I think we're still trying to get a lot of data.
And you could park this and keep it parked, because
Right.
as we learn more things, we're going to be asking these questions. Or at
But-
least we're going to have to know how a bill's made.
But to make sure I'm totally making myself clear, I'm asking everybody. I'm saying a lot up here. I'm not trying to take over. I'm not trying to make all the decisions. I'm trying to make suggestions. So, you know, if you've got a better way to do it, I'd be happy to. I don't want to get overly in the city's business that we don't have to, but the more we understand, the better off we can help. So how do we make a compromise? That's the question.
Well, I think it's just a matter of, as we discuss different things, as questions are raised, we can say, well, let's talk about that next time. We can get answers at that point, you know, because it's hard to figure out exactly where we want to go until we're zeroed in on certain problems or issues or things like that, you know. So I think it'll evolve over time, I think.
So I'm thinking too that one of the things that comes out of this report we're talking about making is where are we headed and what do we need to know. I mean, I think, what do we know, what do we learn, and then by that time we ought to be ready to ask everybody should have some questions by then. I mean, you're doing fine, just keep on bringing them up. I'm fine with that, because it's some things I'm thinking about, so just don't need to jump in. But sometimes I just want to know to what depth we want to take it. Dennis, don't we have an O&M budget meeting coming up for the city? Because I think you mentioned that it was coming up in February, yeah. So that's what we were talking about, you know, the O&M budget meeting would be down in the weeds. In other words, work orders, tickets, how many you close out, how many are left open because we can't get material or we don't have enough money or whatever. And that's the thing. We're an island to ourselves. In other words, if we don't have material in stock to be able to fix stuff that breaks, not everything, but just enough to patch it back together, rather than going out and scrambling like what happens sometimes where we don't have it and we got to run down to Henderson, and then Henderson has to order it, and we're SOL. You know, I used to run with a company that we had backstock, and the backstock saved our bacon more times than not, especially in catastrophes and stuff.
That's a cost, though. That's an extreme cost.
No, I'm not talking about a transformer. I'm talking about a bushing. I'm talking about certain things that are just mundane and.
But if we only have one single feet of water coming into this town.
Well,
those are important issues, and to stock that stuff on the shelf is kind of.
But we are already indebted to SNWA for the raw water line, which hasn't been paid yet. And like Dennis said, and we've done it before, we've flushed water lines and converted them back to potable water lines. That's not a problem. The problem is, do we have the storage capacity? Dennis has already stated that a couple of those tanks are empty. So we have to get those tanks, and that's what the study's gonna do. We have to get those tanks back into repair to where we can use them. Because this city, like George has said, it consumes a heck of a lot of water, more than what we can store up on the hills and underground. So we have to look at that as, okay, we have a contingency. It's just like what happened down in the Gurley streets. They had, I think I counted 9 valves, Dennis, or 9 valves or something like that. They replaced in one day on one set of streets. Well, guess what? They didn't even have the valves in stock. They had to go to Henderson and buy them. That's the kind of stuff that we have a problem with. If we break a fire hydrant and it can't be shut off, a 6-inch pipe at 80 PSI, you're going to drain George's Lake real quick. Okay, so that's the kind of things I'm looking at. In other words, just mundane things that all of a sudden you go, oh, I got to run to the hardware store and get it. Okay, or I don't have it because, you know, it's not here. This is the desert. I found that aluminum and steel and stuff like that last a long time out here, just sitting waiting to be used.
I agree, but, you know, still that, and the problem is that, you know, there's nothing that comes within 2 weeks anymore. It's 16 weeks, 14 weeks, 20 weeks out. So those things are very difficult to deal with when you've got a whole section of town down. So we just got, I think we need to, I think we're headed in the right direction, but we just need to come up with these, keep pushing on this each meeting.
Well, a lot of those things too are handled by the workers themselves or the different departments. You know, I know in the electrical department, you pretty well tried to have in stock the things that were going to typically break, and for the most part you're able to do that. But you know, I understand what you're saying, but it's just one of those things that you kind of almost leave up to the different departments to determine exactly to what level they need to have that stuff available. I don't know if we're in a position to kind of start dictating that kind of thing. You know, so I don't know. Maybe you never know.
Well, I think dictating if there were, I think really understanding it is more important. Because you're right, we're not a big community, we can't afford a lot of stock, this and that. Just need to know what's there, but you just don't want to go, if something broke, buy another one, and you don't need it for another 20 years. So that's I think we're beyond that level.
So if I may, I think we could come in January and have a good first round discussion on the operating budget as far as how we deal with some of those purchasing items. That will, you know, can lead into some further discussion with regards to how we do that. It's true, we do keep a decent amount of material on site for very specific purposes. When we have, you know, there's transformers and power poles sitting down at the wastewater plant for that very purpose. On the water side, we have equipment in various locations to be able to hopefully take care of a break issue. Now, if it's a little larger project, yeah, we may have to go with one of our, open-ended, I'm not using the right word, but contracts that we have with the local supplier to purchase valves in a larger amount, or if we need, BC Parkway is a good example. We just had to go purchase, 15 fire hydrants or whatever it was. But so it's just done differently depending on the project and what we're reacting to.
Yeah, I think these are good. I guess we do have to be careful because we started discussing on items that were not necessarily on the agenda.
Right.
So I guess this is where it gets dangerous because we bring up something that we can just make sure we bring it up and then discuss it with the agenda.
Let me see if I have next December's agenda written down.
Okay,
Right.
that I appreciate that. Was my next question.
The rate study update, the CIP, just those were regulars with one project bulleted. The SNWA Water Conservation Plan, kind of a more in-depth, here's how the water and sewer system operates. And that's what I have so far. Am I missing anything?
And that was just going to be you or somebody else.
On
We
the
don't
water
need
and sewer?
Yeah, we don't need to get SNWA down here for that.
No, and unless you wanted him here for the conservation plan.
I don't think so. I think,
But based on what I'm hearing tonight, I think there might be more interest when they're moving forward with their resource plan.
I think so.
I'm sure they would be more than happy to do that, or have their conservation manager come out. I don't know that it's necessary this time. I think it could be maybe moving into the future, depending on what we start thinking about conservation-wise.
So the other two items is just the reoccurring ones, so the ones that are agenda 5 and 9 today. So
Right.
just make sure that goes on the
Yep.
agenda as well. And while I have the mic, I just wanted to tell Larry, I appreciate all you're doing as the chair, because you're giving this a lot of thought. So earlier, you were saying, hey, I don't want to dictate what's going on, and you're definitely not. I appreciate the way that you're going about bringing up these different agenda topics, and I just commend you for it.
But I guess in the last one then, because sometimes it's a sense of just what is the current philosophy. One decade you keep as much as you can. The next decade you get rid of everything. You don't have anything on. So I think that's what I'm hearing between the group is what's the current philosophy of the city for certain things. Is that something we could discuss sort of? Because that way we could discuss it. I'm trying to think, and it doesn't have to be something in December, but as we go through, it's more of a philosophy. Then again, in our working times, this is a philosophy that worked for our organization.
Sure. Well, I mean, the conservation, what we do with conservation is very much a philosophical discussion, in my mind. And then, once you kind of figure out what that is, then you can turn it into what does that need to look like to implement. If you're going to do more conservation, or if we're going to try to do something different as a community, to me, the philosophical part is where you start. And some of those items for sure.
Does that sound because then I guess I'm just trying to find a way that we can discuss some of these items without getting ourselves in trouble.
I mean, my sense is for December, you're good. Time.
I think we've got, I'm afraid. I think we probably might have more than we want.
But
yeah.
to what you were saying, I think moving forward, we can certainly couch it that way as for future items.
Okay, so yes, we have probably more than the needed is all, not needed, we have plenty to need. We just have not enough time and too much to do. So with all that, thank you, everybody. Was there any, I guess, so to stay on agenda, though, was there any other comments on the agenda? Okay, so then I need to open up the comment period again. Did anybody have any comments? Do I need to read? I guess I'll read the statement. I lost my. Just so it's totally clear, sorry. Each person has up to 5 minutes to speak at the discretion of the chair. Comments made during the public comment period of the agenda may be on any subject. All remarks shall be addressed to the committee as a whole, not to any individual member of the committee or the audience. There shall be no personal attacks against the chair, members of the utility committee, the staff, or any individual. No person other than the members of the committee and the person who has the floor shall be permitted to enter at the discussion either directly or through the member of the committee without the permission of the chair or presiding officer. No action may be taken on a matter raised under this item of the agenda until the matter itself has been specifically included in the agenda as the item of which has been taken. And then just to make a comment, I do appreciate, sometimes we don't necessarily have an involvement with the committee, and most likely it's been you, Fred, but I appreciate your comments, so I just want to make sure I can state that.
There we go. Yes, for the record, Fred Volz. Just two suggestions to you. In looking at conservation programs, arguably SNWA is not really that aggressive. And I would encourage you all, before your next meeting, to check out the Monterey Peninsula of California and California American Water Company and the sorts of limitations that they have on water for an entirely different set of parameters. But it's much more draconian than anything that SNWA is doing by a country mile. Secondly, I would encourage you, if you have the time and the interest and you ever read books, to look at Cadillac Desert. It's a very good description of water in the West and how little there actually is and how the demand keeps growing. And so to talk about our allocation really doesn't mean anything because SNWA and bureaucrats can't just invent water out of thin air. They can do projections till the cows come home, but it's not going to mean that there's more water here. And if we run out of water for whatever reasons, there aren't a whole lot of recourses in this particular location. Thank you.
Thanks, and I believe the rest of the audience has gone home, and unless anybody from the other side, anybody would like to discuss. Any other comments? Okay. Okay, thank you. So I guess I will move to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Vote? Aye. Okay, thank you everybody again, appreciate it.